That was a little confusing, but I think we're here. All right, welcome everybody. Sorry about the faulty start. All right, Mikey, Andrew, you're live. We're live. I think it's happening. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
All right, and I think I just admitted Nick to the chat. So everybody silence your cell phones, please, in the theater. All right, chat, are we live, folks? I hear the opening music. All right, good to see you, Lewis. Yeah, we can hear you, Nick. Looks like, oh, there you are. Welcome.
My $70 webcam's not working.
Oh, no. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Theory Underground. I'm your host, David McCarricker. We are being joined by the big Signorelli, a.k.a. the Master Signified Bodies, a.k.a. Andrew, as well as his compatriot from the KVoy channel, Nick. Welcome. And then, of course, we have the dangerous Michael Downs from the Dangerous Maybe, a.k.a. Mikey. This is the Young Žižekians. We've assembled. It's been a while, guys. You're all being
time, I guess.
You're all being too polite. Everybody in the on the live or watching this later in the future, I told them all this was going to be structured at the beginning, and I think they're all just like, "Say your piece, Dave." Then we'll say. Doesn't need to be that structured. Jeez.
Yeah, like a Zoom, reading group or a symposium.
Stuffy YouTube symposiums where everyone's like a scared rabbit. Wait for your turn.
Everyone, wait your turn.
Right.
All right, folks. Let me give you the quick rundown of how this is going to go. So the long and short of it is, if you're just joining and you have no idea what this is, there is a Slovenian philosopher and cultural critic named SLAVOJ Žižek, who is one of the more popular philosophers in the world. And he, every once in a while, gets canceled, as popular people tend to be. But him more so than others because he puts out more than others. And I think he's got less of a filter or a sort of censor than others. And, it helps that he's not just an academic. He's also a popular figure who puts out like documentaries and, talks about popular movies and has like over 10,000 books and, all that kind of stuff. So we are all the Young Žižekians for our various reasons. The name came about last year as a tongue-in-cheek thing. All right. If it was not tongue-in-cheek, then I would have felt very awkward about the title because I've read so little Žižek. So as far as Lacanian Žižekian theory goes, I'm probably the biggest baby of all of y'all. I probably know the least. I'm kind of here to hystericize everyone in a sort of sense, which in the Lacanian Žižekian vernacular, hystericize simply means calling you out, like questioning you, like why do you think that? And I don't mean calling out as in like, call out culture. I just mean like, but yeah, I know that you think that, but why do you think I should think that? That kind of questioning. And we're all kind of fans of that kind of learning through contradiction, learning through tearing with the negative, learning through working through things, considering audiences of people who would justifiably be non-convinced, which is obviously not the same thing as just hanging out in academia in certain circles that always are engaged around certain text thinkers, concepts, and kind of speaking an insular jargon circuit and not considering the broader public. So, that's the goal. And so we all came together, about a month, 2 months ago to talk about Jonah Hill's documentary Stutz, which was Andrew. I think, was that Andrew's idea or was that, no, it's Mikey's idea, right?
Yeah, no, my friend Shannon's idea.
Yeah. And so, and then here this stuff was happening. I don't really know. And who's the one who found out that stuff was happening on Twitter and that that Žižek was trending and all of that? Who found out? Who notified us?
I think I did first. I'm not sure. I think it was me.
Well, we all got
yeah, we all did.
Like all at once, and then Žižek himself came under fire. So it's a confluence of things.
Right,
Yeah.
and the Rock Hill thing.
Yeah.
Oh, are we saying names? Is that?
I feel it's necessary for what I wrote because it's like a direct response to, or just setting the scene at least.
Okay, cool. So basically, Counterpunch is a leftist magazine that released an article that caused a bit of a stir. If you read the first paragraph, it says that SLAVOJ is this provocative figure who says things like Hitler wasn't violent enough. And then it doesn't contextualize that statement. It just rolls with it. And so we'll get into the details of that stuff in a little bit. Stay tuned for that. But we mainly wanted to use this as a springboard to talk about things that we were already talking about amongst ourselves, because we've been thinking a lot about the theory of subjectivity, the theory of ideology that we're trying to learn from Žižek. Anybody who was paying attention last year to this channel when it was under the name Theory Plebe knows that Mikey has been teaching me about SLAVOJ Žižek's theory of ideology. And so we did 3 streams on that, and then we did a 4th stream that combines the series we did on Lacan with the series we did on Žižek, and that was the one on the phallus. And so why would the working class care about this kind of stuff, and how are we finding it beneficial for how we think about ourselves and the world, and what is the relationship between what we do and the broader left on the one side and the working class, wherever that is, whatever that is, what is that? We'll be talking about that as well. But I said on the thumbnail, it says that this is going to be a respectful thing. And I think that should be pretty easy because none of us are like super triggered or bothered about any of this stuff going on. It was really just funny to see the Twitter commentariat, losing its mind over this piece. People love to jump at an opportunity to not take a thinker seriously, and anything they'll use, any reason to justify dismissing somebody who's written a bunch of difficult books, they'll usually go for it, especially if, riding on that discourse's coattails means you can get some clout. And so that's what we're here for, to get some clicks. Let's be honest, everybody. But we know genuinely, honestly, a lot of the people who saw what was going on, they see this going on and they go, well, that's not the reason I'm interested in SLAVOJ's work. And so I'm going to keep plugging along. He's going to keep plugging along. This kind of stuff, this cancellation stuff never affects the theory people because theory people do what they do. And we're not in it for those reasons, right? But we are in a precarious situation. We're not embedded in academia, on tenure track, or much less like in these institutions or in these conference circles. So it's like we're just out here in the wilderness. And when we're talking to our normie friends about jouissance and death drive or subjectivity, and they hear us referencing Žižek, if they look it up, they're going to find some article like this, and they're going to be like, wow, this guy sounds like a real asshole. Sounds like a real piece of shit. Like, you read the current affairs piece from a couple years ago, you go, what a fucking trash human. Why would anyone read this guy? Right? Or you read the Counterpunch piece, like, what is it that attracts people to this? And the current affairs piece actually put it, I think at one point in there, they say that it's, this was the article called What is Žižek For? And in that one, I think that they basically said it might just be the fact that he keeps saying the wrong things that actually attracts a lot of people to him. People enjoy that, and of course, I don't think they put it in that sense. Like, people get their jouissance from seeing Žižek do this, but to put all my cards on the table, if I'm going to associate with leftists, I wouldn't want to associate with the ones who wouldn't want to associate with Žižek, right? And so it's like, Yeah, we could all sit here and talk about Badu because Badu plays his cards very carefully, and he doesn't go out and he has a bit of a filter, right? He's a big fan of the Cultural Revolution, and he was a big fan of cancel culture back in the day. He was canceling Deleuze, and so if you're into Badu, maybe it's a bit easier. But no, if you're into Žižek, it means you are sacrificing certain connections. Now, for us, that's not a sacrifice. I mean, it's actually one of the benefits. But we won't miss you. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's enough for the setup, though. What are we going to do for the next hour here? We're going to talk about the counterpunch piece. That's what Nick's going to do. We're going to play a message from Daniel Tutt of Zero Books, where he elaborates on why he, on the Twitter discourse, had contributed saying that Žižek has an antipathy to the working class. I reached out to him, asked him for comment on that. He elaborated and said we could play his message on stream. Andrew has some thoughts on that because it's related to his interests in Althusser. And then once that's all been set up, we're going to actually get into what is this theory of subjectivity, why does it matter? And when I said earlier that this is an opportunity for us to talk about something we were already talking about, this is also an opportunity to talk about what just happened over on Sublation Media, because I think it was a week ago, Ashley Frowley, who we love, by the way, was talking to Doug Lane, and I just met her in London like about a month ago, and we did a patron-only stream for Sublation Media with Ted Reese and my partner Ann, and that was just a great time. But even in that conversation, I remember Ashley had said some things about subjectivity, and I remember kind of being like, thinking about it after the fact, like, what was she saying about subjectivity? And so I reached out for clarification from her. She told me kind of her position a little bit more. And then here she was in conversation with Doug, and basically when he characterized the psychoanalytic interest and context of subjectivity, of subjectivity, this theory of subjectivity, he was drawing off of Russell Jacobi, and Russell Jacobi is a big defender of the psychoanalytic tradition, but specifically the Freudian one. I don't think he's a Lacanian, and so I've not read him myself. I've got some of his books some people gave me, but for me, what I'm looking forward to the most in this conversation, outside of kind of responding to some critics and trying to salvage the reputation of someone who honestly doesn't need us to be doing this, is this opportunity for Mikey to kind of, just say like, hey, folks over at Sublation, so here's what you don't like about these theories of subjectivity. Okay, well, here's how that doesn't really apply to what we're doing and what we're interested in, and how what we're interested in is actually a sort of correction on that whole thing. And so we'll get into all of that. But for right now, I want to kind of just hand it over here to Nick, who's probably done the most in terms of effort in the last day preparing for this. Welcome.
Thank you,
Nick.
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of fun reading the article, but you know what? I'm glad it was written because it brought us all together, and now we're going to address it. So I would like to just read what I wrote today. I think this will set us up nicely for the proceedings. And after I read my little intro, I am going to bullet point some of the objections made in the Counterpunch article. And I would encourage people to interject when they want, or just let them hang. And I think, over the course of our symposium, they'll be addressed in one way or another. All right. So, as we all know by now, this past week, SLAVOJ Žižek came under fire, primarily for political statements he has made in the past. Charges against him as a frenzied political shapeshifter were backed up by other notable academics who capitalized on the moment to side with his detractors. Jeremiads against the purity and authenticity of his leftist orientation are nothing new. By now, burning his media persona in effigy while taking his provocations in bad faith has become something of a yearly tradition. And this ceremony is never brought to its conclusion without taking some pot shots at the legitimacy of his philosophical undertaking. Strangely enough, his bibliography in multiple languages is often cited as somehow evidence against rather than support for his seriousness as a philosopher. He's too prodigious of a writer. We Žižekians, in my opinion, should not be expected to support each and every of his articulations apropos of his changing political perspectives. From my point of view, when it comes to his politics, I wouldn't say that there's an actual holistic exterior to his politics, and that the attempt to discern the figure of a latent imperialist, pro-capitalist, liberal behind this sort of convergence of different perspectives actually ignores one of the main leitmotifs of Žižekianism, and that's anamorphosis, which I would define as an optical illusion which reflexively bespeaks the distortion inherent to the subject position. So the common example here is that of the, I think, Hans Holbein painting, The Ambassadors, where there's this kind of skull that's warped and you have to change the angle from which you see it in order to reveal that, oh, it's a skull. So Žižek's style is anamorphotic in this sense. It forces you to change your subject position constantly. So that's one thing, but we could make excuses for him and ourselves. We could say, oh, well, you need to be familiar with his theories of ideology, jouissance or enjoyment and social antagonism, before trying to make sense of his mercurial political shifts. We could say SLAVOJ, the commentator, says controversial things in order to rouse liberals, conservatives, and Marxist-Leninists alike from a kind of self-adulating complacency. We could say that he just doesn't take very seriously the media outlets who routinely enlist him to proffer his, assessments on current affairs, but then are just as quick to throw him overboard when record of certain not so PC utterances is dredged up, like in the case of this article. Does SLAVOJ say things which, even for those of us who believe we understand some of the rudiments of his theory, are very difficult to agree with? Absolutely. Do I think some of what he has to say about military interventionism or NATO is wrong? Well, I'm not a fan of American military interventionism or American imperialism in general. And when it comes to NATO, I consider myself very undereducated in this topic. So I won't be weighing in there. At any rate, I'm sure that apart from those political views, which are for him axiomatic, and I'm thinking, he has certain views which are chiefly informed by his experience of growing up under and quote unquote actually existing socialist regime. Much of what he avows in his op-eds, and I owe this thought to Michael and so on, as we've dubbed him from Žižek and so on, the podcast. Much of what he avows in his op-eds are really kind of samples extracted from whatever book he's working on at the time, and which, like, when you remove these statements from the larger network of ideas that he's experimenting with, they can appear incongruous, unfinished, and maybe underdeveloped. Now, does he care? Not at all. Should we? Well, let's figure that out as we progress. I understand that many of his contentions about the impact of, let's say, Trump's election don't necessarily square with his endorsement of the Squad, that he might have supported liberal causes to purge the Slovenian government of socialist elements, as Rockhill in this article claims. I can't say whether this is a good or bad move, having not grown up in the Soviet bloc. I have no idea if he was actually involved in the establishment of the liberal democracy of Slovenia party, as Rockhill claims. And in a footnote, Rockhill also says that he's not so sure of this claim either, but that he has it on good authority, blah, blah, blah. And as for the claim that he doesn't support the working class, I find this to be completely baseless. As Egon Hamza said on Twitter, Žižek simply doesn't fetishize the working class, which I would agree with. And I imagine, and I can't substantiate this, but I bet he comes into contact with more of the working class than do a large majority of academics who believe their work serves the interests of the proletariat. What about the whole, oh, he's not a real philosopher spiel? Well, in today's discussion, Mikey and co will be countering this claim with a lot more verve than I can muster here. But suffice it to say, in my opinion, there's no way to attack a system as intricately developed and deeply textured as that of Žižek's without appearing foolish. Understanding SLAVOJ, which is a goal I wouldn't count myself as anywhere close to reaching, entails not only tarrying with Lacan's three registers, but also translating Hegel's central concepts inside that framework. Any critique of his philosophy, which isn't as equally conversant with the traditions within which he is operating his innovations, should not be taken seriously. I know what we're asking in this regard is a tall order, but hey, Žižek is a heavy lift. And as Dave mentioned earlier, I think rather than admitting defeat, many people who have at one point or another thought to take on Žižek's project ultimately find recourse in the tired argument that he's a charlatan and a paradox monger who's in it for the money and the fame.
Okay.
Because that's a much easier option than reading Hegel. And I think that's what everyone's trying to avoid here, is actually engaging with Hegel. So that's my prolegomena. And I have some bullet points here. We don't have to read them all, but
let's just see really quick if anybody wants to. Yeah, does anyone want to say anything before we get into the bullet points here?
Not
Mikey?
really. I think it's better. The stuff I have to say, I'll say later.
Okay, cool. Because I know that Mikey has some stuff prepared on this note about the working class and stuff. But yeah, it probably makes sense for us to do that, to get into that stuff once Andrew's gotten into this stuff on the other side of the Tut thing. So let's do some of these bullet points. Yeah, really quick. Let's just cut. We don't need to lead people on forever. Why would Žižek say something like Hitler wasn't violent enough? Could we just get to that? Is that one of the bullet points you have there, Nick?
Not that specifically, but maybe we should get that out of the way because that's a big matzo ball.
Yeah. Who wants to take a crack at it? Who's actually read him saying it?
Right. So he says it on an interview as well, that Hitler wasn't violent enough and Gandhi was more violent. And you have to understand in his book on violence what he means. He talks about the difference between objective violence and subjective violence. Things that Hitler did like, genocide, the Holocaust. Yes, it was objectively true that the Holocaust happened, stab to our Holocaust deniers out there. But, this was an atrocity. But what this represents to Žižek is a phenomenon that we subjectively adhere to because we're used to murders. We're used to seeing that, but we're not used to the sort of thing that's outside of our peripheral vision, that is objective, which is what the system does. And that Hitler coming to power was, and what he could do was actually a failure of objective violence. So it recoiled to subjective violence, which were the Holocaust. Whereas someone like Gandhi, with his fasting, it caused upheaval and change within, colonialism, imperialism in India. So for him, objective violence is any act that could create revolutionary change of the entire system. And that's what he means by Hitler not being violent enough, that he couldn't change the system or create any change in Germany that he promised. No, he just ended up regressing toward the path of scapegoating. I mean, it's fascism, it's Nazism, and that's what they do, scapegoat. They use different sorts of appeal to romanticism and other ideological forces, and while not doing anything, for lack of a better term. That's my stab at it. Pretty much objective violence for Žižek, and why Hitler or Gandhi was more violent was because he created systemic change and destroyed and dismantled the system versus someone like Hitler.
Great job. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just add in. I mean, look, Andrew nailed it, but I'll just say, like, maybe his SLAVOJ's choice of objectives, subjectives a little, I don't know, confusing. Here's what it boils down to: there's violence against people, and there's violence against the system, your symbolic order, your social order. And the idea is that Hitler was very, very violent against people, but he didn't do anything to really change the structure of capitalist society. All he did was augment it by bringing in this fascistic scapegoating thing against Jews, right? Whereas Gandhi actually set out to change the very structure or framework of his society, and effectively did so. And so it's in this sense, like, there's violence against human beings and there's violence against the social order itself. And that's all SLAVOJ is getting at, is this distinction. And by violence against the social order, he's simply saying a reconfiguration of that social order. Capitalism itself, or we could even just say capital, was very violent in relation to feudal social orders, right? It totally undermined them, broke them down. And so capital was incredibly violent in this sense of changing, modifying, revolutionizing the social order. And then that's what he's got in mind.
That's good. Nick, you want to take it away here?
Yeah. Feel free to interrupt at any point. So on the table, we have Eurocentrism. I want to mention that Žižek and so on did an episode about SLAVOJ's supposed Eurocentrism. So we can talk about it, but maybe for the viewers right now, you could just check out that episode where they address it. Another bullet point here we have is his output. This is a funny one. He writes too much. He publishes too much. He gives too many interviews. He made documentaries. You're not supposed to do that when you're a philosopher. What else do we got here?
He repeats himself.
He repeats himself. God forbid, if you believe something, that you should repeat it. This is something that he does. It's true, because for Rockhill, who translated Rancière, he, as he put it, wanted to guarantee lucrative sales, or his publishers did. So they asked him to get a foreword from Žižek. And what Žižek sent back was a passage that strikingly resembled something he had written in ticklish subject. Now, this is something he does often. I noticed he did it in Surplus Enjoyment, the beginning of the second chapter. The whole beginning is verbatim the foreword he wrote for Gabriel Tupanamba's Desire of Psychoanalysis. I don't think this is a problem. I think it jibes really well with the rest of the chapter, but this is something he does. And according to Rockhill, this shows a shameless disregard for scholarly rigor. And had he any, as he puts it, had Rockwell had any institutional power, he would have rejected it. So you get this scholarly rigor charge a lot too. And I find that it's often connected with the institution of higher education and this thought that, universities, because they impose upon their doctoral students a structure within which they're meant to work and produce their writings, that they have a factory model that produces better thinkers, better research, better ideas. And that's called rigor. Do with that what you will. What else do we have here?
They taught us how to write in a very boring way with a lot of references to a lot of people we didn't really read who we actually gutted, but we have to do this in order to get published in the right journals, Yeah.
Peer review, which means that only your peers will ever read what you write, and maybe not even they don't want to read what you write either, because if it's better, it's like what Ernest Hemingway's character says in what's the Woody Allen movie Midnight in Paris. He's like, well, if I like what you wrote, I'm going to hate you because I'm going to think you're a better writer. If I don't like it, then I'm not going to want to hurt your feelings. Or in the case of a lot of academics, they will make it their mission to hurt your feelings. At any rate,
or they'll just say,
yeah.
or they'll just say it's interesting,
Yeah, exactly. Which, SLAVOJ says after conference, that is one of the main descriptors that people use when they don't want to say what they really think. It was interesting. All right, something else here that I thought was interesting is that, but actually interesting, SLAVOJ says life under capitalism when he was growing up in Yugoslavia at the time was better, and Raquel cites some statistics about Yugoslavia, Slovenia, standard of living. He doesn't understand. He's like, he doesn't offer any anecdotal evidence as to why life under capitalism was better. That's one thing that I thought was kind of funny. What else is here? Some supportive military. Yeah, go ahead.
That one is probably the real sticking point for this author. As I didn't fully read this article. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I read like the first half of it, but I interpassively read it very thoroughly through Nick. But this author is upset that SLAVOJ is not like Michael Parenti. That's what it boils down to. He wants Žižek to be out there being like, hey, everyone, you got it wrong. Actually existing socialism, awesome. That thing I grew up, my experiences with it firsthand, they were great. I'm sorry.
Let me read ahead a little bit, because what you have to say there directly speaks to these next few bullet points. So yes, he doesn't offer any anecdotal evidence for why life was worse under this regime. To me, it seems he mainly dislikes the fact that SLAVOJ is not a fan of actually existing socialist regimes, and has never lent his support to the project of realizing Marxist ideals on a global scale. I'm going to quote what Raquel says in a footnote here about Badiou and Žižek. Badiou and Žižek have occasionally taken political positions in support of the working class, so he admits this much. And this is not the object of my critique. It is instead their stalwart opposition, with only very minor and explainable exceptions, he says, to the international socialist movement from 1917 to the present, which has taken the form of anti-imperialist state-building projects from the USSR to Vietnam, China, Cuba, and beyond. So I thought that was a very revealing comment. He also doesn't like the fact that Žižek uses Lenin and Leninism and being a Leninist as a kind of floating signifier, and accuses him of supporting liberal causes. And there's an interview he did a while back, I forget what the publication is, where he calls himself a Leninist in the sense that, Lenin brutally seized power at a moment where it was opportune. I related his idiosyncratic use of the term Leninist in this sense to something like the, Bedouin revolutionary event, where one swoops in at just the right moment to cause a truth event to happen, but it's only after the fact that this event emerges as such, as an event. In the moment, one can't really discern the meaning of one's actions. but I would say that along or pace Badiou, Žižek is more of a thinker of the event than revolution itself. Maybe Mike or Andrew could counter that, but I know event does play into his system. But I'm just going to cap it off with one more quote from the article. And I think this is, Mikey, I think you'll have a lot to say about this, because it cleaves very closely to something Žižek repeats often about event, revolution, fascism as a false form of revolution. But this author inverts it in a way where I think he gets it completely wrong and absolutely misses the mark when it comes to Žižek's theoretical system. And I think that this statement here can be one of the main hinges of our entire discussion, especially when we're going to relate his psychoanalytic interpretation of the subject with his political theory. So Rockhill says, such a posture literally means that these self-styled or self-stylized radical thinkers, such as Žižek or Badiou, demand something that cannot be done, which is the epitome of petty bourgeois radicalism. What they truly desire, if we translate their pseudo-intellectual narcissistic self-indulgence into materialist terms, is the appearance of making the most radical demands imaginable, while at the same time avoiding any threat to the material system of social hierarchies that has elevated them as leading intellectuals in the imperialist core. They desire the impossible and even act on this desire precisely because they do not want anything to substantially change. That then is their big idea of communism, namely that it is impossible. There you go. Thoughts, comments?
Okay, so no, I'm glad you highlighted that, Nick, because when I was reading the article, as he's moving down, he finally starts talking a little bit about Lacanian Žižekian theory, starts talking about the act. And he frames it as the act is this desire for the impossible. Problem, of course, is that that's not what the act is at all. The act is that which makes the impossible possible for SLAVOJ. This is what the psychoanalytic act is every time, whether it's Lacan talking about it with Antigone in Seminar 7, or the various examples SLAVOJ gives of the act throughout his work. The act is when somebody does something that at a given moment in the symbolic order is impossible. Nevertheless, they do it, and it retroactively changes the symbolic order. Like, oh, it was possible, right? For us, I mean, it's a thing like, oh, it is literally impossible for people to not work and have money. And I'm not talking about like somebody rich who inherited money. I just mean your average person. It's impossible for you to have a good amount of money where you can live comfortably and not worry about bills or anything and not work. That's impossible. But the point is, we would want to make the impossible possible. Like, that's what a political act is, where you go, no, actually it is possible, right? But somebody has to does the impossible to make the possible, right?
Serfs looking at each other under feudalism say, and one of them goes, imagine if we could do any kind of job we wanted. And then the other one's like, shut the fuck up. What's the point of that? That's impossible. It was impossible.
Yeah. You choose your social job, like you select it. What do you mean? That's impossible.
It was impossible.
Made it possible.
Right. Or imagine like, even like back then, like, could you imagine if we didn't have to attend church, if we had a Bible of our own?
Yeah.
You know?
So the Protestant Reformation, you see, is this kind of act, right? Yeah. And that's the whole point of, now, whether we call it an act or an event, I've talked to Todd McGowan about this before, and SLAVOJ often uses them interchangeably because they really kind of do the same thing, but it's almost going back to the terminology you were using in violence. Like an act seems to have a subjective connotation to it. It's people doing it, right? Whereas an event is almost as if like the social order itself triggers its own reconfiguration that opens up a possibility. But that's just kind of terminological hair splitting. But no, I mean, he misrepresents what the act is. Now, also in claiming like, oh, well, but it's an idea, like communism is an idea for Badiou and for Žižek. It is, but their whole point is making it an idea is what holds open its possibility. And I mean, this idea, like they don't want it to be actualized. They both want a post-capitalist society to be actualized. But for them, look, they're convinced that old traditional Marxist socialist answers aren't going to be the answer for us moving forward, right? Now, traditional Marxists are going to argue against that. But for Badiou and Žižek, they're convinced that the old style Soviet programs aren't going to do it. And so you either, if that's how you feel, you either fall into a kind of despair and go, well, there is no alternative. You can't do anything about capitalism. Or you see communism as a kind of horizon, a possibility. And you're not sure exactly about what its content is, but you're constantly you're constantly struggling to think through what that could be, right? And that holds open this possibility. But I mean, this idea that the act is just desiring the impossible, that's just false. I mean, there's so many examples of him clearly talking about the conditions of impossibility. The M is in parentheses, and talking about how the act is all about the act that makes the impossible possible. I mean,
yeah, I would say in Žižekian speak, impossible is also something of a compliment. It is something to aim for. Now, we don't want to just constantly reiterate that, oh, you need to understand his use of the term violence or the term impossible within his own idiom. But I would say it is important. But that's why we're here to define these terms in Czechese.
Well, and I would also add that he doesn't just come out with these utterly absurd takes when it comes to his public op-eds. I would say I think a lot of these op-eds, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that is what liberals are saying right now, and you're basically saying it in your own way, Žižek. And I just am like, I don't know. I'm always like, I don't know when it comes to this geopolitical stuff. The stuff with NATO, it's always been this big question mark for me, but it's not a deal breaker at the end of the day. But what I am trying to say, though, is he's not coming out saying, he doesn't just come out and say in a public interview or op-ed piece, Hitler wasn't violent enough, and then full stop, and then move on to something else. No, he says that in a context where he adds, someone in the chat mentioned this a little bit ago, he follows that statement up. And so you have to be pretty uncharitable to not follow him out there. But you're right, though. When you're dealing with a philosopher, contingency, possibility, act, desire, subjectivity, ideology, subject, object, all of these different terms, truth. I'm sorry, if you think that you can go off of a dictionary definition and then judge what the philosopher says based off the dictionary definition, you're wrong. You're wrong because the people in the dictionary are just going off of, okay, what people generally mean is this. And no, philosophers reinvent what these things mean, because these things are what they mean at the way that most people use these terms generally don't make sense if you actually go a bit deeper. That's the whole thing that people don't like about a philosophy class. You spend the first couple classes just having your doxa broke down. Oh yeah, I believe that. And then I believe that. And then, oh, but those two things don't work together. Okay, well then how do we reconcile this? Over and over and over again. And then once you actually start getting into philosophers' primary works, you go, oh, they're working this stuff out. Their whole life project is to understand what these things actually are, and they're developing their own sense for what it means as they go. And sometimes they're arguing it explicitly, sometimes it's just an implicit part of their project. But yeah, with SLAVOJ, we shouldn't always have to do this. But I mean, in a conversation like this, we're doing this one for the normies. So absolutely, if you're new to Žižek, any of these terms, just always go, oh, okay, I think I know what that means, but take it with a grain of salt, right? That's the main point.
Can I just two things on this article, and I don't know if we move on, but I just the last two things I just want to say that caught my attention. SLAVOJ is going to be known for two things in philosophy as we move forward: his theory of ideology and his Hegelian. I guess we would say his Lacanian theory of ideology and his Hegelian Lacanian ontology. Right? There's no mention of either. There's no reference at all to the two things that he's focused on the most in his life. This idea that he's primarily a political philosopher or this kind of public intellectual isn't really accurate. What he is a very rigorous. I know that his style is deceiving here, but he is a rigorous ontologist and theorist of ideology. And I just think that the two things that are most important to his work aren't mentioned here. I think that tells you something. And the other thing, I mean, I've seen Marxists attack SLAVOJ in the past like this, and it's always the same thing. Like, whoever's making the critique, they always presuppose a Marxist Leninism of like the unbarred big other. Like, my Marxism has all the right answers, and I am merely its priest informing you on absolute truth because I have science. I have materialist science, right? And all of this is worked out, and you are a heretic who simply won't accept the truth that's already been laid out. And I don't think Marx in any way, shape, or form would go for that. I think Marx would welcome new thinking about capitalism, new thinking about politics and all of this. And I say that as somebody who thinks you can't even begin to have any clue of what's going on in the world without Marx. Marx is absolutely essential for any type of cognitive orientation in what's going on, right? I think these kind of attacks always come from doctrinaire Marxists who think that Marxism as a science has everything figured out. It doesn't have any internal inconsistencies. Neither did actual existing socialisms. They didn't have internal contradictions built into them that undermine them. It was all just exterior capital and all that broke them down. And so
it was all the reaction's fault.
Right. Like it's and so I guess that's kind of what I always see in this is that they defend Marxism in a way that's religious. They defend it the way that the Christian fundamentalists I know defend Christianity, and how a lot of new atheist types defended atheism, right? Like, the content might not be religious, but the form in which they're defending the content is religious. And when I see it, I'm like, okay, well, if you're presupposing that you have a kind of master knowledge that can make sense of everything, and we don't need to think anew, we don't need new concepts, we've got it all, and we just need to rely on the old Marxist-Leninist answers. I mean, we're not going to agree on that.
What's weird is that he cites as a supposedly rigorous thinker, analyzer of U.S. imperialism, of all people, Noam Chomsky. That's who he mentions. It's like, oh, well, that's a rigorous analysis.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
I'm sure
rigorous
that there's
analysis is always scholarly rigor. This is such a invoked term half the time, and it really just says you don't meet my standard, right? Or even my institution's standard. And someone like me who's working class and not an academic, I go, and like, you know,
Right.
I mean, I think for all the work SLAVOJ's done and the immense philosophical range he's had in dealing with Deleuze and Hegel and Kant and how he moves between all of them. Nope, that's not rigorous. That's just bullshit. Like I just don't know how anybody can read his work and think there's no philosophical rigor to it. I don't know.
It's faith in the big other of the institution of higher education.
I want to make a quick little, just to say, all right, I think that the idea of rigor and truth are good ideas, and they're worth striving for in our lives. But like all things, including jokes, there's a time and a place. And that there are ways of mixing jokes and the pursuit of truth and rigor. There's ways of mixing these things, and there's ways of experimenting. And the idea of the university is also a good thing. And so but what happens in the institution with the grind, right? The you need to research, you need to publish, you need to blah, 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 grind. What comes in to appear as rigor a lot of times, it's just these signifiers, right? You're putting off the signs of rigor. I don't think any of us have a problem with real rigor. And For They Know Not What They Do, the book that we've all been reading, we just finished reading it with the Žižek and so on podcast folks and Matthew Philspader. That was a very rigorous work. And Mikey, here with us now, is going to be teaching that, and that course launches on February 25th. Go to theoryunderground.com/courses if you want to look at the courses that are currently being offered. Yeah, I'm going to use this as a plug before we segue here. The other thing is that the idea of the university itself is something that you can use to measure the existing institutions against. But it's something that you have to flesh out, and you can't just go with a definition. You have to actually think it through. What is that idea? What are its roots? That class begins next week, a week from today. I'm one of the teachers for it. There's a few other people in that class. It's the first class that Theory Underground has made available on the website. So I hope you'll think about joining. Karl Jaspers wrote the book on the idea of the university. He is the father of existentialism in a sort of sense. He's a psychiatrist, an existentialist, and one of the profound master thinkers of the early and mid 20th century German philosophy scene. And so it's like if any great philosopher writes a book about the university, and you've got issues with the university, you don't want to go to college, you're feeling hesitant about going to the university, or you've seen things and you're critical of the university, or you're in the university and you're wondering, why am I here? You can redeem your faith in the idea while being critical of the institution by reading this text. And I think that it's a positive critique, and I like it for that reason. And so anyway, long story short, the idea of the university is the idea of a community of truth seekers bringing together their contradictory perspectives, trying to flesh out a universal understanding of everything. And it might be impossible and it might be contradictory, but it's obviously worth striving for. And so someone in the chat was just like, why do I feel like Žižek is so contradictory, though? Obviously, he's a Hegelian. He teaches through contradiction. You cannot come away from Hegel without being like, oh, contradiction is generative. Without working through contradictions, we don't level up. That's what I have to say.
Can I just interject there? That's exactly what one of the most facile criticisms that's levied against him amounts to, which is that, oh, he just always says things are the opposite of the way they are. Like, that's easy enough to do. Completely, as this author did, disregarding the fact that he is a Hegelian.
Yeah.
And you do contradiction. Contradiction is constitutive of what we could possibly call reality.
And if anybody's like, wow, you guys, you're all so nice and respectful when you're on stream, but then in your memes, you're always so violent. I just, it's not just for the lulz. You cannot make sense of the fact that there are differences between viewpoints without highlighting the contradictions. Okay? And so teaching through contradiction, that's the goal here. So Mikey, do you want to say anything about the current affairs piece, or do we want to go straight to Tut?
Let me just run through some basics on the current affairs piece real quick. Okay, I don't want to take too long on this, but I want to address a couple things. So, I mean, the worst charge is that he's racist. And when anybody's accused of being a racist, that one catches your attention. The other charges leveled against him in the current affairs article, whatever. Here's what I think. I think the quote he was talking about on Islam it's one that doesn't look good. Okay, immediately when you judge it just when somebody quotes it. But I think what he's trying to do, and I think this is what he often does in these political issues, is he's trying to think dialectically, right? It's trying to see these contradictions between sides. And if you don't simply just go this side good, this side bad, then people are going to be upset with you, because a lot of people engaged in politics really are this side good, this side bad, absolutism, absolute dualism, period. Right. And so what I think he was the point I think he's trying to make when he's talking about the immigrant situation, the refugee crisis, is when you have two symbolic orders coming into relationship with each other, really kind of like quickly, spontaneously, out of nowhere, there can be a lot of frictions between them. And I think he's trying in this stuff to really deal with the issues that can arise by forcing members of different symbolic orders to just immediately coexist, right? And that it's not as easy as that. And there's going to be issues on both sides. But that's the thing. You're not allowed to think there's issues on both sides. It's just the Europeans are bad and the immigrants are angels. And this to me is, this to me is liberal racism. Is always the immigrants are treated as angels, as non-contradictory beings, as perfect-hearted people. And that's when you do this move that a victim is angelic, that they're without any ill will, any contradiction. SLAVOJ is not saying all the refugees are bad or they shouldn't be well. He keeps talking about how Europe needs to let them in and accept them, right, and help them. And even the author talks about this. The author keeps going, well, yeah, he keeps saying like he thinks Europe should help them and welcome them. He's also seen that there could be these issues that arise when people from different symbolic orders, I'm sorry, if people have a fundamentalist Islamic symbolic order and that's their belief system, and you come into Europe, there can be problems of friction with these, secular European and a fundamentalist Muslim. And to anybody else besides, I guess, a liberal leftist, everybody just goes, yeah, of course there can be issues there. Muslims would agree, right? So,
no, wasn't that article, if I remember right, because it was a while ago, doesn't it say it like it has him like being like, he talks about some of the high crime rates and stuff like that in some of these districts in Angela Merkel's Germany, when remember Angela Merkel made a decision to bring a lot of immigrants in, and it was actually an anti-democratic decision, and SLAVOJ was kind of taking her side on that, but also saying, but yeah, there's like these high crime areas, there's gang rape, there's robberies, there's, and there's these things. And then the point is that the person in the article is like, yeah, but he doesn't then go and say, show, the stats on how it's actually the natives who commit the higher amounts of crimes. That is a talking point that these people specifically, like this whole script tends to repeat. What's lost on them, I think, is that when your neighbor who you grew up around your whole life goes and does something messed up, it is like everyone's like, oh my God, that person? Or they're like, oh my God, that person, I fucking saw that coming, right? But it's kind of like someone who's, we all grew up around that person. And then the shock value or the, oh, I saw that coming value comes from the fact that they were already a part of the community. You take a bunch of people, not from around there, you put them there, and then they do something. And it's like, this is something extra. This is not something that we would have had to deal with if it hadn't just happened, right? Like if they hadn't just been moved here. And I'm sorry, that's a normal thing for a normal person to see. There might be good reasons still to do it. And I think there obviously are, because with climate catastrophes, with geopolitical problems, there's just going to be more and more and more of refugee crises. It's not going to stop. We need to have we need better solutions for refugee crises is what it really comes down to.
Through this.
And in that work, I remember reading that in a class, actually, in that work called the double bind, the problem with the neighbor, or whatever, the one on terror. And anyway, in that work, he's basically saying on the one side, you can never bring in enough immigrants to solve the problems. And on the other side, you can never keep out enough. And he's saying that more immigrants or less immigrants is the wrong argument. The real argument is what's going on geopolitically that's causing them to have to move here in the first place. And so that would obviously bring up like a mirror to the United States, where we have to go, oh, and I hate saying we, because none of us are like, oh, the United States, that's us. But, like the point is like, our involvement with Saudi Arabia and helping and backing Saudi Arabia as they destroy and, drop bombs on all these other countries. I'm sorry. It's just, that's what he's trying to highlight. He's trying to highlight the way that the NAFTA deal shafted farmers in Mexico and made it so a lot of these farmers who had their own farms are all of a sudden having to go, find work over the border. Okay. That's not their fault.
Also like, okay, Islam as a religion can create problems. Okay. Just as Christianity and Buddhism and Hinduism and Judaism can create problems, and at the same time within themselves have emancipatory elements. And he thinks the contradiction. He's not going to view any religion or any political system as unsplit, substantial, having a pure, uncontradictory essence. He's always going to look for the contradictions in any symbolic order. I've heard him praise Islam on numerous occasions for various doctrines. He's all about the charity dimension of Islam, that it commands a certain act of charity, and he's always celebrated that. And so I've just seen him time and time again point out the contradictions in various religions or belief systems, etc. And that's what he does. But this is one, you have to say it's perfect or it's without anything problematic. And everybody knows that all of these systems have issues with them. It's just there's a little group of people who say you can't say that when it comes to one of them.
Right.
And yeah.
They'll probably clip.
So
They'll probably clip me or you. They'll probably clip us, and they'll probably clip something we said out of context from this conversation and try to use it against us in the future, right? It doesn't matter. Fuck them. No one cares. No one cares. That's what this all comes down to, is jealousy. People are like, oh my God, he gets to say things like that I have to be so careful to avoid being misunderstood as saying. Yeah, common sense things that normal people would take seriously. Sorry.
Wasn't Marx himself also getting canceled a lot too from like a lot of the like publishing companies he worked for, or newspaper companies he worked for, and that's why he was always traveling.
Yeah, chased from country, chased out of countries, having his publishing house shut down. So, okay, guys, how far into this conversation are we? What time is it?
6:08.
It's basically an hour.
My time.
I want to bring Cadell last in here. I want to bring Michael from Žižek and so on in here. Both of them were going to join in about a half hour was the plan. And so I think that we'll talk about the working class aspect of all this and whether or not Žižek has an antipathy to that after we bring on Cadell and Michael from Žižek and so on. Oh, and by the way, folks, that's the big surprise. Yeah, I forgot to say it earlier. I should. You know how you're supposed to like lead with things like that? I left it all until now, but hey, stick around. We've got some special guests. Anyway, so Mikey, let's just get to the theory of subjectivity thing. obviously, folks have a lot to look forward to from us in the very near future concerning Žižek's work. I'll be putting out in the same way that every morning at between 9 and 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I've been putting out 20 to 30 minute clips of our conversations from over the years about Introduction to Lacan. After the 21st of this month, it's going to be clips of our conversations about Žižek, and those are going to keep coming out every day until we actually launch the weekly lecture series that we're going to be doing on For They Know Not What They Do. So, but I mean, in a nutshell, we're going to talk about why we care about his theory of subjectivity and ideology here, and respond to anyone who might be thinking after they heard Doug's explanation of the theory of subjectivity, why would you care about that, right? And so my summary of Doug's theory of subjectivity, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mikey, is that we're basically reptilian brains that don't really have conscious control.
Hold on.
We don't have
conscious. Right.
No. Let me correct.
It's not Doug's summary. It's not Doug. This is Doug summarizing Russell Jacoby's position.
I said that.
Okay. Okay. I'm just clarifying.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, Doug is characterizing the psychoanalytic theory of subjectivity that people find interesting, and he uses Russell Jacoby to do it. Okay. None of us have a problem with that. What we have a problem with is that if you are interested in theories of subjectivity and psychoanalysis today, the chances are, at least if you're in this kind of milieu that we're all in, it's not Russell Jacoby's, okay? It's McGowan's and SLAVOJ Žižek's, okay? And the thing is Doug's had McGowan on a few times, and so to characterize the theory of subjectivity as Russell Jacoby's, which is like this overdetermined, reptilian-brained, non-free subject, is problematic because what it's missing is the fact that Žižek and McGowan, they're correcting that. It's an intervention against that. And so, Mikey, what is Lacan. The theory of subjectivity through Lacan? Yeah.
So basically what we've got, the problem is when we talk about it in terms of like, oh, we have biological drives and that's our reptilian brains. The issue is that it's presenting this image of libidinal economy as the standard concept of the id, which the id is like taken to be this cauldron of wild animalistic impulses that has nothing civilized about it or culturized about it or anything like that. It's just wild, natural, biological impulses. And the problem, of course, is that for Lacan and Žižek and McGowan, there really is no id. Now, drive comes to take the place of id, but drive is not wild, animalistic, reptilian impulses. Drive is a surplus that emerges in our body, right? So, and it's often always mediated by signifiers and language and culture and prohibition and all of these cultural aspects. So it's not this naturalistic biological thing. Drive is actually what denaturalizes us, according to Lacan, Žižek, McGowan, and it's precisely what takes us out of nature, which derails us, right? And the point is, animals operate according to instincts, right? They have this kind of intuitive knowledge of how they relate to their environment, right? We don't lack, we lack that, right? We lack that kind of instinctual, sexual relationship to things, right? Animals know what they eat. Now, of course, destruction of an environment or whatever, there's evolution and all of that. But for the most part, animals take up an instinctual relationship to their environment once it's kind of been put into place for them. And so for us, you find that we don't actually seek the satisfaction of our needs. Now, we do have biological requirements and we do get them met to the best of our abilities. But the point is, we don't eat in order to negate our hunger. We eat because we like the sensation of eating. We eat to eat. And this type of thing is, you want to look at beautiful bodies, not because it doesn't meet a biological requirement, but because you enjoy it. It gets you excited. And so because human beings have a kind of higher cognitive ability, we also have this ability to think about what we could have, the enjoyment we could have opposed to what we do have. And we start comparing and fantasizing about, oh, I'm kind of satisfied, but if I had it like this, I'd really be satisfied, right? And this whole thing, ultimately, this derailment really begins with drive. And I think Alenka Zupancic does a really great job at talking about this in her book, Why Psychoanalysis. So I just want to read a quote here. She's talking about, to give some context, she's talking about how human sexuality doesn't really have fixed objects or instinctual objects tied to it. Our bodies, the various parts of our bodies, don't have fixed objects. Different objects can get attached to them, and it's not really even about the object so much as just the sensation you get from that part of your body. And this can take us all over the place, right? So the quote is a little bit long, but it really is the best summary of this that I've ever seen. So she starts off.
We like ourselves some long quotes here. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, well, here we go. So Alenka says, Freud starts with the discussion of sexual aberrations that were identified as such in the existing corpus of medical knowledge: homosexuality, sodomy, pedophilia, fetishism, voyeurism, sadism, masochism, and so on. In discussing these, quote, perversions, the mechanisms involved in them, basically the deviations in respect of the sexual object, which is supposed to be an adult person of the opposite sex, and deviations in respect of the sexual aim, supposedly reproduction. Freud's argument simultaneously moves in two directions. On the one hand, he extensively demonstrates how the aberrant mechanism involved in these practices are very much present in what is considered to be normal or natural sexual behavior. Insofar as they are well integrated in what is considered to be normal sexuality, they are not viewed as perversions. They are only considered as perverse aberrations if they become altogether independent of the appropriate sexual object and the supposed sexual aim. If they become autonomous in their fragmented partial aims, that serves no meaningful purpose. Freud would object, however, to the word become. And this constitutes the second crucial line of his argument. Drives are fragmented, partial, aimless, and independent of their object to start with. They do not become such due to ulterior deviation. The deviation of drives is a constitutive deviation. Freud writes, the sexual drive is in the first instance independent of its object, nor is its origin likely to be due to its object's attractions. This is why, from the point of view of psychoanalysis, the exclusive sexual interest felt by men or women is also a problem that needs elucidating and is not self-evident fact based on attraction that is ultimately a chemical reaction. Now, that's the first paragraph, and I just want to summarize. He's saying that human sexuality, the term is often used as polymorphous perversity. And the point is, we can get sexual enjoyment from all kinds of different things, and there's not this fixed, rigid form for sexuality, right? Some people enjoy this, some people enjoy that, and human sexuality is all over the place. And he thinks that's its default setting, its constitutive setting. It's not made that way. That's what it is. And in that sense, we have been derailed from nature because our sexuality is not governed by fixed objects or fixed purposes in the way instinctual sexuality works for animals. So we're cut away from nature.
In that case, we would not be free, right?
Well,
if that were the case.
Yeah, if we were locked into instinct, we wouldn't be free. There's a freedom that comes with losing instinct and being tossed into drive, even though this comes with its own set of problems.
Right.
Nonetheless, this drive, this cut away from nature is why we are free beings, right? Is because we're not governed and programmed by instinct in the way animals are. So this is one way of, from a psychoanalytic perspective, to talk about human freedom. Okay, so Alenka continues. The discovery of this constitutive and original deviation of drives, which is precisely what distinguishes them from instincts, will gradually lead to one of the major inventions of psychoanalysis, the concept of object small a, objet petit a, as it was named by Lacan. To put it simply, objet a will come to name the other, the real object of the drive, as independent of its object. So the point is, I know that's tricky, but she's saying drive gets hooked on an absent object, a missing object, not getting the thing. So our stimulation in our drives is a stimulation from not being totally satisfied. If you want stimulation in the drive, you can't be totally satisfied because that means the absence of stimulation. So we get stimulated or excited through not fully getting the thing we want, through missing it or circling it, as Lacanians talk about it. And so that means the ultimate object of drive is actually a virtual or negative object, which we call objet petit a. It's the missing object. Now we look for this missing object in concrete particular objects, but you never find it there because it is constitutively virtual, and it's not a concrete object. It's a virtual object. It's a negative object. And so that's the idea, is that our sexuality is governed around an impossible object we never can get, right? This is not how it works for animals. And this is also on top of drive. This is why we have desires. We're always seeking a new thing, another object, because it didn't make good. We thought it would be the thing that really satisfies us. And ultimately it disappoints us and we're on to the next one, right? So human desire and drive, and they're two different things, but both of them are structured around this negative virtual object called objet petit a.
The object cause of desire.
And it causes your desire because it causes desire because it orients the subject in relationship to an impossible object. So like that's what gets you. If desire was simply for one specific object, well, you get the object, that's it. You wouldn't be a desiring subject. You are constituted ontologically as a desiring subject because the thing you're really trying to get is a virtual impossible thing you can't get. So that's how you keep on desiring, right? That's what causes you to desire.
We say that if the object cause of desire is what structures the very form of our desire, then it's almost like that structure itself is what it's aiming at. That's why it's the object cause of desire.
Mm-hmm.
There's a structural lack to it as well. Mm-hmm. which is something that is revolutionary in Lacan, and what he was arguing about, I realized in his development of it, and the lack of the object or impossibility of it is from like the other schools of psychoanalysis, like object relations, that believe that there is an object and it's based upon instinct and it's the mother's breast or whatever, which is totally exactly the opposite of what Lacan is getting at, is that, these objects pretty much in these other schools rely on instinct. And Freud, if you read Freud, instinct is not a thing. And Mikey just pointed that out. One thing I wanted to add, because you talked about the body. The body for Lacan is already a body that's symbolized and misrecognized, right? It's even something that he critiques Merleau-Ponty on. One thing I just kind of want to comment on is like we could see what Merleau-Ponty says. It's like, it's not that I think, but I can do in my spatiality, right? As a totalized gestalt of my body. What we can see Lacan say is, I misrecognize, therefore I identify.
You're right, yeah. Because the idea is that you're an empty, pure, negative subject, right? Which means you lack any positive content of your own. But I mean, and this is where you get into the temporal causal paradox in a sense. And I mean, it's retroactivity. Point is, it's in trying to identify with a positive object that you are not, in misidentifying, that the subject emerges. Like you become a negative subject because you cannot fully be identical with whatever you're trying to identify with. Whether that's, you're not in a full ontological sense, your image in the mirror, right? That's not you, but it is you in this other sense. And so you're misrecognizing what's going on here. And whether and you can extend this to your social position. Is somebody saying, I am a teacher? Well, yes, you're a teacher and you go to work and you teach students and all that, but there's also this dimension of you that is irreducible to a teacher. You can become another social position and still remain the same subject. And so this whole thing is the effects of language on the body. In the simplest terms, is that we are beings that have developed enough cognitively that we come into a relationship with our bodies and with language, and this causes all kinds of misidentifications, and it causes the unconscious to emerge. But yeah, I mean, you're right. And so this whole thing, I mean, drive is the way Alenka is talking about this. There's a lot of different ways we can focus on the subject, but we can focus even on the ego. You can humans end up being denaturalized through this friction between our bodies and language, and drive is one of these key ways it happens. And so Alenka goes on. She says,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
okay, but let us look at the origin of this concept in Freud's observations. One of Freud's main examples is thumb sucking. While he analyzes as a manifestation of infantile sexuality, the existence of which for the first time systematically pointed out by Freud, and which has met with strong resistance. Okay, in relation to the need for nourishment to which it attaches itself at the outset, the oral drive pursues an object different from food. It pursues and aims at repeating the very sensation of satisfaction produced in the region of the mouth during the act of nutrition. Oral satisfaction, which arose as a byproduct of the satisfying of the need for food, starts to function as an autonomous object of the drive. It moves away from its object and lets itself be led into a series of substitute objects. In other words, the concept of the drive and of its object is not simply a concept of the deviation from a natural need, but something that casts a new and surprising light on the nature of human need as such. In human beings, all satisfaction of need allows, in principle, for another satisfaction to occur, which tends to become independent and self-perpetuating in producing and reproducing itself. There is no natural need that would absolutely be pure, i.e., devoid of this surplus element that splits it from within. This split, this interval or void, this origin or this original non-convergence of two different versions of satisfaction is, for Freud, the very site of ground of human sexuality. So this is the last part. This is crucial when it comes to understanding another important emphasis of Freud's conceptualization of sexuality. Sexual is not to be confused with genital. The genital sexual organization is far from being primordial or natural. It is a result, a product of several stages of development, heterogeneous, dispersed. It is a result, a product of several stages of development involving both the physiological maturation of the reproductive organs and the cultural symbolic parameters. It involves a unification of the originally heterogeneous, dispersed, always already compound sexual drive composed of different partial drives, such as looking, touching, licking, and so on. Since the original disposition is necessarily a complex one, the sexual drive itself must be something put together from various factors. The unification bears two major characteristics. Firstly, it is always a somehow forced and artificial unification. It cannot be viewed simply as a natural teleological result of reproductive maturations. And secondly, it is never fully achieved or accomplished, which is to say, it never transforms the sexual drive into an organic unity with all its components ultimately serving one and the same purpose. The normal, healthy human sexuality is thus paradoxical, artificial naturalization of the originally denaturalized drives, denaturalized in the sense of their departing from the natural aims of self-preservation and or the logic of a pure need as unaffected by another supplementary satisfaction. One could even say that human sexuality is sexual and not simply reproduction, precisely insofar as the unification at stake, the tying of all the drives to a single purpose, never really works, but allow for different partial drives to continue their circular, self-perpetuating activity. So that's how Alenka describes it. And once you hear it, like you start going, okay, this denaturalization thing kind of makes sense, because you find that what makes us denaturalized is we seek enjoyment itself in its excess, which is ultimately self-destructive and harmful, which derails a kind of homeostasis that animals tend to take up in relationship to their environment. And so we are ontologically derailed by this excess we're always pursuing.
Mikey.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, we're at I had told Cadell that we'd bring him on at 6:30 your time, and we're just it's 6:30 now. He's in the waiting room, so I was about to bring him in here. But you're not done yet, are you?
I can get done quickly.
Okay, here let's.
I have a couple more comments and then another quote, and then
Are we gonna are we gonna listen to the cut?
We'll do that too. We'll do that too.
Yeah, we'll do that after the after we bring Cadell on, right?
Yeah, I have a thing I want to say in response to the working class thing related to Daniel Tut's saying Tut said that Žižek has an antipathy towards the working class. I will want to say something about that. Andrew will want to say something about that. Everyone will probably have something to add. And then I will also, but here's one of the things I want to make as a promise to anybody who's coming to this stuff, and it all sounds very alien, especially if you're listening to these quotes and you're like, oh my God, what? Because I saw some emojis in the chat that looked overwhelmed. And so I'll just say, we will talk about how this cashes out for thinking about our personal lives. And because personally, one of the absolute most important things, if I were to step back and say, what's the thing that impacted me the most in the last few years? One of a few things was absolutely jouissance, when it finally clicked for me, when I finally understood the difference between enjoyment and pleasure in this technical sense. And then I started seeing it in my own life. That has been freeing. It has actually freed me in various ways. It is a form of liberation to come into a critical distance on your own habits and things like where you have expectations, like, oh, I'm seeking pleasure and I keep giving myself a hard time. And then you realize I am actually getting jouissance from this, right? Freedom comes through that. And so, but Mikey, we'll talk more about that though, is what I'm saying. And so Mikey, you go ahead and finish up. We're going to let Cadell in here in a sec. Okay,
let's do this. Okay, so basically I'm defending the thesis that the left needs to understand libidinal economy or subjectivity. I just put out a new blog post today called Wage, Labor, and Jouissance, why the left needs Žižek, right? And the point is, it's this point, right? That what I just said, and I know the quote is maybe a little dense, right? But I'm quoting Alenka on purpose, right? Because first off, Alenka is one of the foremost authorities on this. And I think despite the density of that quote, it's still the best short summary of this Freudian idea of our derailment from nature. It's just a little dense. So, okay. So yeah. And so part of what I guess I want to say in response to what Doug said and his discussion with Ashley. I really like what Ashley had to say about capitalism, by the way. So the point, I guess, is Lacanians and Žižekians never claim that human beings never act in their own rational self-interest. Of course we do this, right? The problem is it's just not that simple, right? It's not that it's just this is Homo economicus that Adam Smith and the classical liberals established, this idea like man or human is the being that acts in their rational self-interest. And the psychoanalytic rebuttal is, yeah, but there's this whole other thing called death drive or jouissance. And so what it is, it's not that we don't act rationally or we can't reason. Of course we can. It's that there's almost another kind of reason operating within us. Not this wild, irrational thing with id or biological impulses, but the human unconscious is a highly rational, sophisticated mechanism, and it has its own logic to it, its own reason to it. It's just a reason or logic that's incompatible with our basic logic and reason operating at the conscious level. And so the unconscious, like I've always liked to say, you might not be an intellectual, but your unconscious is. The unconscious is highly sophisticated in its intelligence and how it arranges its manifestations and slips of the tongue and dreams, and etc. But okay, so what we claim is that human beings are contradictorily split between between the pleasure of rational self-interest and the enjoyment or jouissance of irrational self-destruction, even though I think there's a deeper rationality to it. In Seminar 7, Lacan's famous example of somebody following their jouissance regardless of the consequences is Antigone. And Antigone did not act in her rational self-interest, but rather acted on the basis of her ethical desire or drive. But the point is, you can say, well, okay, and basic position is Antigone's caught in this situation. Her brother has died. King Creon is saying he's not going to recognize her brother and give him a proper burial. And she says, fuck that. Yeah, you are. And so she just will not let up with this demand. And it's getting to the point like she's going to be imprisoned or killed or something. And she doesn't care. She's not going to give ground relative to her desire. She's going to demand this. And so in one sense, you could say, well, she's behaving irrationally. She's putting herself in harm's way. In another sense, you could say, no, at a deeper level, she's acting rationally, but in this rationale of jouissance, of enjoyment, of not giving ground to the basic demand of your libidinal economy. So this is the split we find ourselves occupying. And so Lacan's concept of death drive really only starts to make sense in light of his distinction between jouissance and pleasure, or enjoyment and pleasure. These are technical terms. They don't mean the same thing. Pleasure is the lack of excitation in the body, whereas jouissance or enjoyment is excessive excitation. Pleasure operates according to the pleasure principle, which seeks to expel excitement, tension, stimulation, friction, etc. from the body and restore it to a state of homeostasis, equilibrium, calmness, tensionlessness, in the name of self-interest. Jouissance or enjoyment, on the other hand, is that which is beyond the pleasure principle and operates in accordance with the death drive, the compulsion to repeat. The motto of the death drive is, do it until it hurts. Jouissance is the excess or surplus enjoyment we get from sacrificing our pleasure and undermining our rational self-interest through self-destructive behavior. To enjoy self-destruction is to enjoy various forms of loss or sacrifice. Todd McGowan is great on this. Žižek writes, the ultimate lesson of psychoanalysis is that human life is never just life. Humans are not simply alive. They are possessed by the strange drive to enjoy life in excess, passionately attached to a surplus which sticks out and derails the ordinary run of things. This is from Less Than Nothing, page 499. Oddly enough, death drive is all about a surplus life. If the surplus life of jouissance is what makes life worth living for human beings, then we can argue that psychoanalysis is the true study of the life of humankind. The human being is the one organic being that cannot properly be understood through the science of biology. Biology only obfuscates the true surplus life of the human. The human being is forever caught within the friction between the pleasure principle and death drive, between pleasure and jouissance, between bare life and surplus life. Death drive builds up excitation and the pleasure principle releases it, but just so death drive can build it up again. This is the dialectic of pleasure and enjoyment within the drive. And so last thing is McGowan says, and McGowan is the best writer on this that I know of. McGowan says, while it may appear as if the distinction between pleasure and enjoyment is a distinction without a difference, just a semantic or a psychoanalytic concern, it actually has clear political consequences. Pleasure occurs within the coordinates of the social field. We can make sense of pleasure, but enjoyment takes place at the point where sense breaks down, where the social field becomes contradictory and no longer accounts for what people experience. The contradictory quality of enjoyment makes it painful to endure, and yet its status as excessive relative to the field of meaning allows it to play a determining role in the structuring of our existence. Because enjoyment exceeds the realms of signification, it is meaningless. but this structural position allows it to give a direction to what we do in way of that pleasure cannot. We experience pleasure when we remain within the confines of the social order and acquire an available desired object, whereas enjoyment necessarily occurs at the limit of the structure at the point where we no longer belong to it. The pleasurable object can be a new job, a romantic partner, a bounty of cash, or even a juicy hamburger. No matter the content of what gives me pleasure, in order to remain just pleasurable, it must also remain within the limits of my society that presents to me as possible. All of these objects fit within the possibilities that the social order makes available to me. None straddle its limits. The death drive is a contradictory agency. It erects obstacles in its path and gets off on the obstacles rather than on overcoming them. The death drive, the primacy of the obstacle, causes the distinction between suffering and enjoyment to dissipate. One enjoys what thwarts one's conscious wish, what causes one trouble. When pleasure derives from overcoming contradictions, enjoyment occurs within them. That's from McGowan's book, Enjoyment, Right and Left, pages 27 through 8. And so I'll just end by saying, Ashley quoted Marx saying he defended the idea that humans use reason all the time. Well, Žižek defends reason all the time too. Of course, we can act rationally. That's not the question. The point is the Freudian Lacanian unconscious is also highly rational, intellectual, and cunning, but it's geared towards enjoyment, whereas our rational self-interest is geared towards pleasure.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
And
That was an accident. My bad.
okay. And so, what we have at the heart of human libidinal economy is this competing logic between pleasure principle and death drive. And what I'm trying to do in my work a lot of the time is try to apply this to real life circumstances, wage labor, consumerism, etc. And I know that it sounds abstract, but again, this is, I'm trying to drive home the point that for us Lacanians, the whole issue is not that we are irrationally tied to our drives and therefore unfree. My point is that human freedom depends on the drive, and that this human unconscious thing that's all about jouissance is highly sophisticated and highly intellectual. That's it.
And with that, we're a little bit overdue on time. We were going to bring in Cadell last and Michael from Žižek and so on at 6:30 Eastern, or what, I guess that would have been Central Standard Time. I can't get my time zone straight. I've been all over the place in the last month. But here they are. Let's bring them in right now. Come on in, guys. Let's see if I can get you in here. It's going to be a party.
Hey.
Welcome to the Power Hour, guys.
What's going on, y'all?
Yeah.
Welcome. Hello, Cadell.
Hey.
Hello, Michael.
Look, it's
All right.
Ryan Reynolds. Oh, my God.
Hey everyone.
For a lot of
nice.
people, this is going to be their first.
Nice to meet you all.
First time
Yeah,
meeting
it's good to meet
Michael
you.
and so on, right?
A lot of people, this will be
the
your...
podcasts are not used to seeing this beautiful visage.
A lot of people, this is going to be their first time seeing Michael's actual face, or a lot of people on my channel, this is going to be their first time seeing either of these guys. And so let's take a second here for you both to introduce yourselves. We'll start with Cadell and then go to Michael.
All right, thanks for having me. My name's Cadell Last. You can find me on, I guess YouTube's the easiest. A little bit of background on me is that I guess I was trained as an evolutionary scientist, and throughout my doctorate sort of fell down the Žižekian rabbit hole, and have been sort of attached as a sort of an excessive partial object ever since. And it's been a crazy ride. But there's something about the whole Slovenian school and the whole Slovenian movement that just once you're into it, you can't unhook. It's so fascinating, and the way in which their pushing the limits of contemporary theory, to me, opened the door to philosophy in a way that I had never experienced before. So excited to be here, and love the work you guys are doing. I think the meme game you guys are bringing to the internet is next level. I'm a little jealous of your meme game, but I think it's good for the culture. So I'll say that.
Michael.
All right. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun so far. I'm one of the hosts on the Žižek and so on podcast. We've been doing for quite a while now and just wrapped up a 4-month reading group on Žižek's For They Know Not What They Do, which a bunch of you guys have participated in, which was really successful with Matthew Flisfetter. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
I feel like I just went from being a baby to being a littler baby. I might have gotten, you're all so far advanced beyond me when it comes to Žižek and his work. And so I'm really excited to learn a little bit from all of you here, especially concerning the questions of SLAVOJ Žižek's relation to the working class. And I know that eventually our conversation about that will be a nice segue back into Mikey getting a chance to kind of talk about how this stuff changed his perception and experience and understanding of being a warehouse worker. Working with a bunch of people who they don't go to college, they don't care about theory. How did SLAVOJ Žižek become so important there? That's going to be one of the things that we will get into. And then the question about ourselves being working class intellectuals or whatever is something that we're about to get into here. So I hope that if I push play on this message that Daniel Tutt sent us, that you'll all be able to hear it. But if it starts playing, just nod your heads. If it doesn't, I'll figure something out. So we're going to listen to what he has to say in a second here. But does anybody want to give a quick little what did he say on Twitter? Does anybody want to say what they saw being said on Twitter? Anybody have we're not going to sit here and pull it all up and
No,
everything.
I think there was different comments, but I think the one that surprised most of us was, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't want to paraphrase, but it's something along the lines of Tut says that he sees a certain antipathy in Žižek towards working class people, which, I mean, if SLAVOJ doesn't care about working class issues is kind of what I take that to mean. And so that was the one thing that caught my attention, I guess.
All right, and then I reached out. I said, hey, we'll be talking about all of this stuff. We want to give you an opportunity to elaborate on what you meant. The thing that stuck out to us was the statement about the antipathy to the working class. And so here we go, folks.
Hey, what's up, Young Žižekians? It's your buddy Daniel Tutt here. Hope everybody's doing good. Yeah, so I felt that the Gabriel Rockhill article was actually abysmal. I confess that I had mild sympathies when I first looked at it, in part because, as a student of Žižek myself, I was just, never really convinced of his turn towards Hegel over Marx. And I think I'm much more of a political philosopher. And lately, let me just make an interesting remark and what I find interesting about the Rockhill piece in the saga. So he calls Žižek a rad-lib homo postmodern philosopher, which is kind of false on both accounts, right? I mean, if we're really honest, Žižek fought against post-Marxists like Ernesto Laclau, and what did they fight over? In many ways, they fought over the constitutive basis of class struggle. So, and Žižek, and for Laclau, class was just one other, almost, Laclau in a sense was kind of an intersectionalist theory of class struggle. But neither Žižek nor Laclau put much of a great onus on an understanding of the proletariat or an understanding of socialist politics that would further a conception of the independent organization of the working class. And that maxim, that principle, which you could call a principle of classical Marxism, is one that I think we must resurrect, but not on the terms of contemporary liberal identity politics, which insists on relativizing class oppression as a kind of one other oppression in a kind of discursive battle, right? No, it's a much more real and constitutive basis of capitalist social life, right? One that actually breaks down all of the presuppositions of liberalism, right? Now, of course, I think actually Žižek writes about that. He recognizes that. But he does often fall sway, especially in his notion that building working class consciousness would result in a essentialism or would result in a fetish of class experience. I mean, yes, it would if you're allowing to be subsumed by liberal discourse's understanding of class. But if you're not, then I don't think that it would. And I furthermore would say back to you, young Žižekians, why would you call yourselves working class thinkers? I think that that's interesting. I mean, for Žižek, from a place like the former Yugoslavia, which has, decades longer, more recent experience in socialist politics than we do in the United States, even a leftist to organize or agitate on the basis of a working class consciousness like we're doing, like you're obviously doing, by calling yourselves working class Žižekians. That's extremely new. I would say it's like 6 or 7 years old that opening has even been possible, right? So I guess my question is, what can we learn from Žižek's philosophy that would allow for furthering of that contradiction? Because working class is not an identity, but it has to be constructed in order to facilitate the emancipation of the class system as we know it. But you have to start from that. You can't just not do the necessary work of educating people about working class experience and working class conditions so that some type of organization, some type of unity, some type of transcendence of the liberal system can take place. This would be my hope. And I think that Žižek's philosophy actually offers a lot of insight in that regard.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for sending in your elaboration. I want to give the floor here first to Andrew.
This is the part that I've been waiting on. And, it's not even that you're getting, Andrew or Master Signified Bodies. Nick and I, we always do the fusion dance. So it's free signifiers tomorrow, or free beer bods tomorrow. So there was a lot of points that Daniel, brought up, and I want to maintain in dialogue to what he's saying, and pick different, ideas that Žižek and maybe various other thinkers, without getting too ahead of myself. But I think working backwards, his first thing is, why would we call ourselves working class Žižekians, right? Well, we're not proletariats. We're working class, I would say, because none of us have any sort of PMC position or any means of ownership in the means of production. And we don't hold any university status, right? We sort of, to take a term out of Deleuze, deterritorialize the way education and higher learning could be learned in, the atmosphere of the internet, just like many others are doing. And I think Žižek brings all these thinkers that you're not really going to learn in a higher education center, besides maybe Hegel, right? But you're not going to learn Marx. If you learn Lacan, it's going to be in film studies and not in psychology, right? And if you do, it's only like one thing, and it's very bastardized. It's the mirror stage, and overrated, in my opinion. It's overrated. But what Žižek does is bring all these thinkers in dialogue. And what we said in a lot of these other discussions in this panel so far is that Žižek repeats himself, right? And Žižek has mastered Death Drive, right? And what Death Drive also does is it repeats and allows us to learn. It's not just about an excess enjoyment, but it allows us to learn. And as Alenka said in the symposium that happened a while back, die and die better, right? And so one thing that, if we're talking about the working class, right, and what it means to be a working class intellectual, is that, and you could see how maybe post-COVID has kind of, in its contradictions, allowed education and philosophy to center itself onto the internet, where people who don't have degrees or access to higher learning, that are working class, that are, as Dave likes to say, skeptical warehouse workers wearing earbuds, can learn from a platform like this, from other channels. We got people like Cadell that are doing this. We got podcasts like Žižek and so on, Machine Unconscious, where people have a way to learn and then gain a curiosity. And they're still working class. They're not in any, again, other class dynamic. So I think, and he pointed out that, working class is not an identity. But in a way, it is a sort of mediation, to be Hegelian about it, a sort of signifier or language that could situate a subject in today's time to sort of work through and understand their position in capitalism, right? And to really evaluate the term working class, to take what Nick said about how we should understand Žižek, is a sort of anamorphic style in which we need to also change our perspective and our notion of working class. Because one thing that Žižek does, and he's correct, Daniel's correct, is that Žižek doesn't fetishize the working class, and he also doesn't fetishize the working class as a sort of proletariat. Because what does Žižek say in the criticism to Stalinism and For They Know Not What They Do? We Stalinists, we communists have special stuff in us. That is a fetishism right there. And Žižek wants to point this out and also not fall into the errors of that by going back to this sort of crude MLism. But he doesn't also want to privilege the working class as being victims and honing on this identity politics that liberalism is attaching itself to, or identity politics in a sort of liberal form, because it is that. So Žižek is doing something different, and he's realizing that there are these contradictions in the working class. Because if you were to do this or do contrary and take on a fetishization, he would be a beautiful soul. And that's something that I think Žižek is trying hard not to do, is in talking about emancipatory politics on the left, is to avoid running into the error of being a beautiful soul, which a lot of people do. And we could see how this Counterpunch article could be seen as like not only criticizing Žižek, but also making him to be this sort of like vehement devil, and that he doesn't understand Marxism and the working class. And me, as this beautiful soul writer, I could tell you what Marxism is and have this master's position. But I think I'm kind of going ahead of myself on that. But pretty much, this is something that Žižek is doing, and also why I think what maybe Daniels is misunderstanding, because he has said that, he said it in the first message, but the only thing I want to evoke from that is in Daniel's first message, he says
the message that we're not gonna play over the air. It was one of the early ones. Yeah.
But I just want to tie in this part because this is something that was important.
For sure.
He says that Žižek doesn't think of class in general because he comes from the Althusserian school. And that Althusser moved away from understanding class in a sort of sociological aspect, or understanding of the relation of power unto itself. And Žižek and Althusser, in the structural Marxist aspect, sideline this class dynamic from understanding it in the traditional Marxist sense. Maybe somebody like Lukács of this dynamism aspect of it and its potentiality for class consciousness. And why is it? Well, if you look at the ideological or the essay on ideology by Althusser, he's talking about class. But what and if you read the entire book, The Reproduction of Capitalism, class is inherent into understanding ideology because both the working class and the ruling class are interpolated into it. It's just that the ruling class have the sort of position in which they could dominate the working class by distributing capitalist reproduction via ideology with the newspaper, with the churches, with the schools, with these institutions. One thing that Žižek does that I think Althusser doesn't have is the fact that ideology could fail. We're not just interpolated subjects, but that we have a subjectivity that operates when ideology fails. And that is where we get the so-called, hysteric, the hysteric who cannot find enjoyment in the big others, injunction to enjoy, and they're trying to traverse the fantasy. Žižek talks about this in Sublime Object when he criticizes Althusser and puts him in line with Kafka, representing the castle as not only being interpolated, but also someone that internalizes it as they hystericize the entire castle and realize that, they were always already in there and they identified, but there's failures into that. I think what I'm trying to get at is the fact that this notion of subjectivity for Žižek is one where we operate in failure as a sort of hysteric. And another thing that I want to add that Žižek does and why he's so Hegelian versus going back to Marx proper is the fact that Marx's thesis on Feuerbach is, what's the last one? It's philosophers have only hitherto interpreted the world. The point is to change it. Whereas Žižek says philosophers they have tried to change the world. The point is to interpret it, to find and question again our perspective but subjective position to then act. Because if we just try to act, we end up creating errors. And I think when Mikey talked about drive, it elaborated everything perfectly. And I want to say that if Chris Crotone says that the left is dead, I think that the left is death drive, and they will continue to repeat and learn and question and also change their subjective position over time. If there is anything that could be called class consciousness, a working class or a proletariat in the Marxist sense. And I think that's why Žižek sees Hegel as something, because not only do we learn ourselves, or not only do we see everything as substance, which we can see as structure in Matthew Fliespader's works, but also as subject. I think that's what I want to end it at. It was a lot.
Thank you for doing that. And I kind of want to give everybody an opportunity to respond to Daniel's question because he spoke to us in the plural, asking why we identify this way. First, I want to be clear with everybody. We don't, at least yet, have a podcast under the name Young Žižekians. We don't have a about section on a website somewhere. And so it's not like we've come out and collectively all identified this way. So I just wanted to see off of all of you all, which of you do identify as working class intellectuals or theorists, or what? How do you identify, and what does it mean to you to say that the class is not an identity, and how do you all think about this? You're all too polite, and you're all like sitting there. You're like,
I mean, I'll just say, I've never stepped foot in an institution, so I'm a working class intellectual. I learned on my own.
Nick, do you identify as a working class intellectual?
I work a full-time wage labor job in admin, so yes, I would.
Okay, now do you use that identity, or do you use that standpoint or experience to say, to stop people from speaking and then say, as a working class person?
No, I do not play that card, because I don't tend to think of myself as that, in that I think I was under the sway of a certain fetishized version of what it meant to be working class, which I picture as like being on an assembly line, essentially. This sort of like Dickensian image of what it means to be working class. I mean, I am maybe more materially comfortable than some other people in this chat right now. I recognize that, but it was actually, your elaborations, Dave, on some of the, on your, idea of what working class is that helped me to situate my own understanding of what it means to be working class. Like right now, my official title is management. I'm in a management position, but I recognize that there is this gap between those who are PMC, and as you often put it, like not just professional managerial class, but the professional managers of capital, and everything else, everything beneath that. And there is I think, a qualitative difference between the two. And when you make that leap from one to the other, your entire, I don't like this expression exactly, but it's appropriate, value system changes. And you necessarily have to shift your entire worldview in that respect to accommodate a new set of values, which have to do with, as I say, the management of the assets of the people above you, the secretive, elusive cabal of the upper classes.
Oh,
and then
we're done. We're done for. You can't use that word.
What happens there is, and I think a lot of people don't even realize this happens when they move up the ladder, is that you have to make an entire series of accommodations, ideologically speaking, in order to maintain your position as PMC. And it happens in the blink of an eye. People don't even realize that it's occurring. So there is such a thing as upward mobility in that sense. But I feel like maybe I'm right at that limit where if I was called upon a few years hence, like I could make that leap. And then suddenly I definitely would not be able to appear in this conversation right now with y'all. Maybe I'm even running a risk doing it right now.
Fuck that bullshit. No,
you guys
no,
are gonna
no,
absolutely tank my career. And
No. My hope for all of you is that you
joking.
get cushy salaried gigs and you don't have to do backbreaking manual labor that makes it so you're unable to do philosophy, you're constantly being stopped from doing philosophy or doing theory, right? Like
Absolutely.
The point is not, I always say this, it's not about whether or not you have some position in capitalism that reproduces, that makes you an ideological reproducer of capital or controller over labor. It's less about the job position that you have and whether that means that you can or cannot participate or can or cannot speak. That would be identity politics in the sense that Tut's talking about, I do believe. My point is just like, insofar as you're unaware of the fact that your position comes with certain roles and expectations, certain functions in the ideological reproduction of a class society, and the major part of that being the reification of a sense of meritocracy. The left PMC in this country does that by acting like, well, there's essential backbreaking labor, and then there are thought leader positions, and the thought leader positions are for the deserving, the ones who did really well in school. And so then the whole question becomes, are you deserving? That's where the whole question becomes, is SLAVOJ Žižek really responsible with all of this that's been given to him? Does he deserve it? Right? That becomes the question. And on the right PMC, they do this petty bourgeois rhetoric thing. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's how you deserve it. But both sides have their own version of meritocracy that they're propping up, right? And the basic thing is, I don't care what you do, good, bad. At the end of the day, you should be able to live a dignified life, right? Mikey, we do identify as working class intellectuals, but not in this way where it's like, as a working class person, I speak for the whole working class right
No,
now.
I do it because my whole adult life has been devoted to philosophy and the life of the mind, talk by Hannah Arendt. And at this point, every single day, I have to fight capital and wage labor in order to have any shred of the life of the mind. That I have to fight capital and wage labor to think at all. And so the very structure of my life is this battle. I don't want to work. I don't want to be a wage laborer. Fuck that shit. I don't, you know, and yet I have to, right? And so my whole issue is that this dilemma that all of us find ourselves in, be a wage laborer or be in poverty, which they're kind of the same now, right? It's less and less of a choice, but do one or the other, or fuck you, whatever. There's no third option. And so this forced choice is something that I have to live every single day of my life in a kind of antagonism towards, in order to be able to write and think. And you know the structure of my day. I wake up at 5 a.m. I go to the warehouse all day. I get off, I go write and research or whatever for 3 or 4 hours at the coffee shop. I go to bed, I repeat. And I want a fuller life of being able to have more time, energy, as you put it. And I think everybody deserves that. I mean, you and I are so big on this thing, time, energy, because for us, it's a way to connect Marxism to existentialism, right, and all of that. And that, I mean, you're the one who thought this up, but I mean, I've forever been changed by the concept. And that's why I would call myself a working class thinker, is for me to be able to think, I have to deal with the fact that I don't have time, energy, thanks to capital and wage labor. And so I'm living this contradiction every day and trying to think through it as I suffer from it. And that's why I would call myself that. And I mean, yeah, I mean, not only do you have to fight against capital and the structure of wage labor, you also have to deal with the fact that your, quote, fellow wage laborers don't have your back in any of it. They don't care. And they basically do support the system. I know it's trendy with a lot of intellectuals on the left to really defend this kind of fetishized. It's going back to what we were talking about. It's as if like the working class are angels. They can't be deceived. Like Vivek Chibber kind of does this thing. Well, okay, that's great when you're saying that in academia. I work with these motherfuckers every day. They're deceived. Okay, yeah. They buy into ideology. They believe that they live in a totally free system. There's nothing exploitative about capitalism at all. I don't have to be here. I can go to another job. You point something out to them like, yeah, but you have to go to another job. And they go, well, that's freedom. I mean, so I'm constantly dealing with the ideological deceptions that working class people are walking around in. And I feel like academics who have maybe comfy positions are scared to say anything negative about the working class. If I want to use my working class identity, it's just to say the working class is full of shit. Yeah. And I have to deal with it every day. I live their bullshit every day. And this romanticizing them as, oh, it's so terrible. No, there's self-responsibility in this too. And any chance they get to hear anything that might change their perspectives on capital, they block that shit out. They don't want to hear it. Now, of course, there's always an exception here or there, and I'm always happy to facilitate that and, try to have that conversation. But most of them, no. This is the best human society can do, is American capitalism. And this is true of people who vote Democrat and people who vote Republican, people who are Christian and non-Christian. When you start trying to talk about anything emancipatory, you have to avoid these signifiers. You cannot invoke socialism, Marxism. They write it off. I told you today the reason that I think as a Lacanian signifiers are so important. If you try to go, and I mean, it's just a thought experiment, right? But if for whatever reason you're going, okay, I'm going to go to a Christian church and I'm going to try to get all of them to stop being Christians. okay, it might be possible to get certain people to not be Christians by having conversations and whatever. But if you tell yourself, I'm going to try to get them to not be Christians, but I'm also going to try to get them to identify as Satanists, you're not getting nowhere. You're not getting anywhere with them. And the guys, and the men and women I work with, you try to get them to identify as socialists or communist or Marxist in any way, shape, or form. It's like trying to get a Christian to turn to being a Satanist. And so that's my thing. I'm some kind of a leftist, but I'm trying to always live with the fact that none of the workers around me are. And it's real easy for academics to just go, well, just develop class consciousness with them. You try it. And try to use your signifiers and see where you get. And so if I'm a working class thinker, it's because I'm having to live all of these working class dynamics in a very antagonistic way while trying to think. Okay, I'm done.
And I think that there's a lot of people out there who are trying to get into philosophy, trying to get into theory, and potentially more emancipatory political projects. And most of the people who are doing these things and occupying spokesman positions in these fields or areas of interest do not speak the vernacular. And they don't have the visceral experiences. And so, look, it would be really annoying. I think if you were always pulling this as like some kind of a card you play. But the point is not like there's just a lot of people. Professors, they're like, well, I'm from the working class. Politicians, well, I'm from the working class. Who gives a fucking shit? You're not anymore. You're not anymore. You're in a different kind of position in society now. So the question is how do you advocate for the interests of the workers? Okay, are our days going to get longer or shorter? Are we going to get paid more or less? These are the fundamental questions. And then the bigger questions ought to be, are we able to move to some kind of a society where we actually have time and energy? Bringing it back to the fact that we're not little angels, that the working class is full of the not good ones, right? Because obviously whenever people do the beautiful soul thing, they're upholding the ones they like, right? And then the other side, the anti-populist left, will point at people like Trump supporters and go, see, well, that's the working class. Well, fuck. I'm sorry. Without time and energy, structurally stultified, functionally illiterate, what do people have? Poor souls. Poverty of the mind, right? No concepts. No way of making sense of themselves in the world. Alcohol and drugs is about it. If it's not that, it's evangelical fundamentalism. It's that, and that's all. And so the question, someone in the chat just said, well, Mikey, but you are working class. At least there is one. Okay, yes, there is one if you want to use this as a way of thinking about things sociologically, sure. But that's just the working class in itself. Now, how do you get the working class to become something for itself, right? And so that's where Daniel Tutt's saying that we need to construct a working class. Okay, well, just really quick, when Marx was writing, or when the Second International took hold, there were working class associations everywhere. There were working class libraries. There were working class kitchens. There were working class... Every kind of institution that society had, there was a working class version of it because working class people had been deprived of rights, and so they started their own organizations. Would we say that they were doing identity politics? Okay. Here's my thing. They did not have to construct the working class for itself. It was already for itself. The question was, what was its plan? What was its strategy? How did it understand political economy? Right? So my position is more complicated. Yeah, technically I'm working class in a weird sort of sense. Someone could easily say that I'm sort of lumpen or PMC, what's the word? Advancing? I don't know. Look at me with this thing on, you better believe it. No. I mean, I've been living under $10,000 a year for the last 5 years, right? I've been living inside of a little tiny hole, basically. Like, I've been able to cut out most expenses. That doesn't give me some kind of like special ability to speak on anything, I don't think. the one thing that I think you're getting at, though, about class composition and working with being surrounded by other workers every day, you have to think, okay, the things I'm hearing from these people who think that they can make the revolution, can I bring that back to my workplace? If the answer is no, you can't imagine bringing that back to the people you spend all of your time with, then you would say, that's not going to work. That whole thing you're talking, it's not going to cut it. That's not identity politics. You're just saying, I can't bring that back to my people. And on the other side, if we're not fighting for a society that's going to free up time and energy for everybody beyond just higher pay and shorter work hours, if we can't talk about that, if that restructuring of society is not plausible, if all you have to offer is you need to sacrifice for generations and generations and do the fight for us and be one of the good workers for us, it's not, there's nothing there, right? So I don't know how much, there's a lot of communists and socialists in the chat. Not everybody is, though. I don't know how I identify. Anarchist Tech Supports said in my chat 2 days ago, he said that being post-left is just wanting the left to be better. And I was like, well, if that's what that is, then I would definitely identify as that. But the problem is all of these identifiers people use mean different things to different people. And I don't really have much of a stake in grabbing a hold of some signifier and saying, this is who I am and this is what it needs to. No, but what I do want, though, is people who say, hey, we're for the working class, or we are the working class, to think about the contradictions inherent to the working class and to their class standing. Okay? That's really why we're doing the Professional Managerial Class Consciousness course that starts on January 25th. Elton LK of Working Class Intelligentsia podcast. He teaches Gromsky. He's also a DSA organizer. He's also a philosophy club organizer in Boise. I really like Elton. He and I are going to be co-teaching a course that's a sort of introduction to a variety of texts about the professional managerial class. What is it? There's a lot of people who use it to dismiss other people, or they just dismiss the term. They say, oh, it's just a counter-revolutionary term. We're going to think about it critically and go with that concept as far as we can in this course. That's the goal of that. For me, there's just a bunch of question marks over all of these things, but we're not the proletariat. None of us are in that Charles Dickens world. None of us are assembly line workers. Things got a lot more muddy, especially in the Imperial Corps, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it's also interesting to point out about the fetishization. Like, last thing I'll say is that with the fetishization of the working class, it also kind of it conceals the fact that the military is also a conglomeration of class struggle as well, and we get hated on by the left, right? And being in for 7 years, the people that are liberal, if they talk about their politics, are going to be from stereotypically California or like New York, and then everybody else is going to be predominantly from Texas or like Midwest and South, and they are all pro-Trump, pro-gun. If you even bring up Bernie Sanders, it's like, oh, that's socialism right there. So it's like, how are you going to bring these signifiers into them too? And the left and Marxists, traditional Marxists, will call me, like, oh, you're just like, capitalist, armed body of man. But it's like, well, I was talking with Swole about this, shout out to Swole, proletariat, said something about like, I think it's Trotsky that said that for the revolution, that even the proletariat, it relies on the military personnel rather than the police, because the police actually oppress the working class, right, and protect private property. It's not necessarily the case with the military. Of course, there's colonialism, imperialism tied in with the military, right? But phenomenologically, personally speaking, I see a lot of people that are resistant toward the military ideology internally. But at the same time, there's also the Žižekian disavowal, and that comes in with it that also needs to be elaborated. But I think, compared to the police, that there's more hope with the working class and the military.
And I would just like to add one thing to bring it back to Žižek, is that one of the main contradictions that I think we're dealing with, and I think Tut is sort of homing in on here with the idea of the working class, is that the rise of the working class in the traditional Marxist sense, what that would mean if there was a working class revolution, wouldn't it, in a sense, negate the entire concept of the working class, because it would redefine what work even is? So this is one of the main contradictions that we're dealing with, and why the fetishization of the working class as an identity is so difficult, presents so many challenges, because it can, in the dialectics of enjoyment, just regenerate the very structures that we're fighting against.
I want to hear from Cadell and Michael, but hold on. I just want to read one thing for context, since we're talking about SLAVOJ. I want to read what I think is one of the better quotes I've found from him on this, and then I want to see what Cadell and Michael have to add. But SLAVOJ says in The Relevance of the Communist Manifesto, he says, the four features of the classic Marxist notion of the working class. 1, it constitutes the majority in society. 2, it produces the wealth of society. 3, it consists of the exploited members of society. 4, its members are the needy poor, or the needy people in society. When these four features are combined, they generate 2 further features. 5, the working class has nothing to lose from revolution. 6, the working class can and will engage in a revolutionary transformation of society. None of the first 4 features applies to today's working class, which is why features 4 and 6 cannot be generated. Even if some of the features continue to apply to parts of today's society, they are no longer united in a single agent. The needy people in society are no longer the workers, etc. Correct as it is, this enumeration should be supplemented by a systematic theoretical deduction. For Marx, they all follow from the basic position of a worker who has nothing but his labor power to sell. As such, the workers are by definition exploited. With the progressive expansion of capitalism, they constitute the majority, which also produces the wealth and so on. How then are we to find a revolutionary perspective and redefine it in today's conditions? Is the way out of this predicament a combinatorics, weird word, of multiple antagonisms, their potential overlapping? But to use Klau's term, is it possible to form a chain of equivalences from classic proletarians, precariat, unemployed, refugees, oppressed sexual and ethnic groups, and the like? And so the point he's trying to get at here is classical Marxists vehemently reject this take on the working class, because they're saying, oh, well, you're blurring the lines, or you're making this maybe too complicated. But I find it to convey a certain truth, right? Namely that there is no working class in the strict sense Marx understood the term to have. What it means to be an employee nowadays depends on what type of job you have. These differentiations are of fundamental importance due to how they shape a person's sense of identity. In the golden age of class consciousness, workers united around certain particular images of the wage laborer. For example, the steel worker or the coal miner. What we lack is a unifying image of the worker. What particular worker serves as the universal worker? What's worse is that it's becoming more and more difficult to envision such an image taking hold in the collective imaginary. What universal image would unite the computer programmer in San Francisco with a barista in Kansas City, with an office assistant in New York, with a truck driver from Nashville, with an adjunct professor in Seattle? Are they all exploited in the same way as the old factory worker was? Do they all get cheated out of their surplus value the way the commodity producer did? Is their industrial capital, labor power, truly the main source of today's wealth, or has financial capital, virtual transactions, speculations on speculations, algorithmic fuckery, etc., taken over that position? Another problem lies in the fact that the vast majority of people do not base their identities on their class positions. Personal identity is far more rooted in one's religion, culture, gender, sexuality, and interests. Hell, people are much quicker to identify with a sports team than they are to identify with a class. Marxists can say that this is no coincidence. Instead, this is the work of capitalist ideology. Fair enough. However, even if you were to get people to agree with this, What image of the worker would you be able to elevate to the universal in their hearts and minds? What, the industrial commodity producer? Ha! Nobody relates to that at all nowadays. There has to be a new concrete embodiment of the universal for identification to occur, and not just the vague notion of this indeterminate thing called capital fucking us all over in some mysterious way. I certainly would love for some sort of class consciousness to emerge and take hold in society. I'm sure Žižek would too, but we have to be realistic about what we're facing. Okay, that's it.
We have a half hour left, folks. Cadell.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I definitely came from a working class background, and I still feel like you could say I always feel like I have traumas from that background that like prevent me from moving forward in the way that I would like to, or the way that I see certain people who don't have that same background moving forward, because there's just so much emotional anxiety and sensitivity around the topic of money that it makes it difficult to move in ways that I see people who don't have that background moving, you know, and that brings in the dimension where you have to combine, I think, psychoanalysis and bring that in there too, because of the affective dimension of what that does to the mind and the body. I wanted to make a joke that, you know, we could get shorter working hours and more pay, or we could just have mindfulness break rooms and yoga sessions in the morning. You know, like I've actually seen that in like some companies, like they say, yeah, like we're fixing the problem for the workers by getting in a mindfulness room, and we have a yoga instructor come in on Friday mornings, and you know, this is helping the work.
Amazon has that. They have the Zen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, you know, and then in regards to the working class as an identity politics, I always thought Žižek's position, and I always appreciated this about Žižek's position, was that identity politics is actually obfuscating the antagonism of both class difference and sexual difference. That when you have everyone sort of focused on their sort of racial or gender identity and making that the primary issue, it sort of erases the possibility for thinking about both class and sexual difference, again, to bring in sort of the psychoanalysis and the Marxism and the connection between that. And I think the reason why is because, as painful as some of the identity politics issues can be, I think the class difference and the sexual difference are the most painful. And so thinking that is painful. and the people who have that experience are the ones, well, you know, like Mikey's bringing out, not everyone who has that experience is willing to think it, but there are people who are willing to think it. And you know, at least in my experience in university, the place for thinking that did not exist. And another attraction I had to Žižek was that outside of most intellectuals that I was exposed to, you know, as intelligent as any of them may be, they all kind of operate with a liberal democratic ideology, you know, irrespective of the intellectual discipline that they work with. So I think, you know, in terms of Žižek's work, you know, whatever you can criticize him about, he definitely breaks that horizon and thinks outside of that horizon. And I think that's so important, that an intellectual of that standard thinks out of that horizon, and not just an intellectual of that standard, but a pop culture figure of that standard. Is, you know, like he gives like a presentation at like a huge arena about the idea of communism, and like it's allowed to happen. You know, I think that's so important. Like you don't see that very often. Like and the way he approaches it, I think, is quite important and interesting. I wanted to make a few points. Let me see if I can make them very quick, because then I want to hand it over to Michael. But I want to say that I really do support the move that because I went through like you could say a beautiful soul stage of being very, like, I remember giving a presentation that I'm actually retroactively embarrassed about, where I was like going full Marxist, you know, and I'm glad that there's no video footage of that. It's like, okay, I was young, but I appreciate Žižek's move from Hegel to Marx, from Marx to back to Hegel, for a few important reasons. I think the concept of the rabble over the proletariat, I think that points to some of the things that Mikey was getting at. I think the rabble it doesn't give you this. We shouldn't search, I don't think, for like an idealistic image of the working class. And I think the rabble is a good concept that prevents that from happening. The idea that we are, I think, and to connect it to one of Andrew's points, which I thought was really good, about basically interpretation over action, being that I'm not saying we shouldn't act, but this idea that we are active subjects that know we are going to actualize the end of history in a world communist revolution or something like that. That's kind of a silly notion. And Žižek always brings up that idea that I would sell my mother into slavery to see V for Vendetta 2. Like when the day after the workers' revolution, so this idea that we all have a workers' revolution, we should just get rid of this notion. I don't think that's a very helpful notion. I think that's just perhaps a screen image, in the Freudian sense, a screen image, maybe. See what maybe one more point.
See right there, right there though. If you can say that that's what Žižek thinks, I think that the position of these critics that we've been responding to for the most part, they'd say exactly that's the point. That's an antipathy to the working class. You're saying that the working class can't go from being in itself to for itself. You're saying the revolution's not possible, communism's not possible. Right. So in a certain sense, maybe, yeah, go for it.
Because I wanted to make one last point. I think it's connected, because we always have this idea that the working class is going to become for itself, abolish the capitalist class. But what if we're not, that image is put in place because we cannot think a deeper negativity? And I think this is, so here's my, and this is partially my idea, but I think it's consistent with how Žižek's developing his political ideas in his latest books. Like in Surplus Enjoyment, I think it features pretty strong, which is the idea of disaster communism. So if we have the idea of disaster communism, that means it's not that the working class is going to overthrow the capitalist class, it's that the capitalist class is going to experience a negativity that puts them on everyone's level, that everyone experiences a global negativity. It doesn't matter if you have $1 billion. They have these fantasies of going to Mars or going into underground bunkers or whatever. But what if there's a negativity that is going to, there's going to be I think to me, that is the only solution, is that there would have to be a negativity that's so great that it actually unifies the human species. And I think the coronavirus is an example of something that before the coronavirus happened, it was hard to imagine something like that happening. I remember the first few days when we're on a global shutdown, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening. This is an example of when the impossible becomes possible, but in this sense. And just my final point, something like coronavirus is probably a symptom of something much larger global negativity that could happen in the 21st century, that might happen in our lifetimes. And that's, I think, that's the only way you're going to get big nation states to unify. Like Kant was silly in the idea of thinking that nation states would unify into some global entity. I think it has to be, in a Hegelian way, a type of global negativity. And I think that is the link where, in terms of global politics, we have to think Hegel instead of both Kant and Marx, because they both had too much a positive idea. And I'll just leave it to Michael there.
Good.
Yeah, cool. That was great, Cadell.
Awesome.
I've got some more general remarks, recapitulating some of the stuff that you guys were talking about earlier. So Rockhill's kind of black book of Žižekianism, I've been asking myself, what is he aiming at exactly in cataloging Žižek's supposed sins? So Žižek is being set up here as the subject supposed to be not radical enough. So Žižek isn't a threat. He fits smoothly into the capitalist edifice, etc., etc. But ironically, Žižek here isn't violent enough for Rockhill, despite his reference to Gandhi and Hitler. And we're all familiar with the kinds of charges people have against the humanities or philosophers in general, the kind of navel gazing, the pie in the sky, head up your ass, or head in the sand type of thinkers. But Žižek has managed to think through the historical moment, providing an imminent critique and tests his theoretical matrix in real time. And this means actually taking concrete political positions. And he gets accused of offering no response to capitalism, no alternative, and at the same time criticized for his various political positions, like actual interventions, claims and stakes. And for the most part, these accusations come from what Hegel calls beautiful souls. So as Žižek defines it, herein lies the lesson of the dialectics of the beautiful soul from Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit. The beautiful soul incessantly laments the cruel conditions of the world which prevent the realization of its good intentions. What it overlooks is the way its own complaints contribute to the preservation of these unfortunate conditions. That is, the way the beautiful soul is itself an accomplice in the disorder of the world it bemoans. Now, with Rockhill, if Žižek is the court jester, then what of the jester's privilege, right? So these kinds of takedowns are a way of avoiding an encounter with Žižek's work. And whether apocryphal or like historically inaccurate, jesters give bad news to the king that no one else would dare deliver. The jester's privilege is the ability and right of a jester to talk and mock freely without being punished. Irony here. So I'm glad you guys have put it on, that it's happening, because we now have Rockhill and Žižek in the same room. So I recently came across this sexual practice called soaking, also known as marinating or floating. It's a sexual practice of inserting the penis into the vagina, but not subsequently thrusting, reportedly used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Jump humping, as it's known, involves the help of a third person to bounce on the bed on which a couple is lying while they are engaged in soaking, providing the missing element of motion without making the couple responsible for the motion itself, the act. So this behavior, as a response to the religious prohibition of enjoyment, makes explicit this essential third virtual point from which our desire is articulated, the epa si muove of sexual desire. So we've managed to stage this interpassive union between Rockhill, Žižek, and us, the jump humpers. And that's it for me.
I mean, if there was ever a quilting point, I don't.
I did not know about this, the jumper. I knew about the insertion and then nothing, but I didn't know about the person who jumps. And in the chat said this is apparently a big thing at BYU. All right, folks. I want to give. Do you, Mikey? You say that's a good quilting point. You think this is this is it then?
Well, can we do? Okay, that ended it. But can we go on a little bit more? Like this is a postscript.
Can we do some pillow? Can we do some pillow talk?
Here's the thing. I really want to finish some of the points I had about the current affairs article. So let me. There's like 3 more main criticisms of SLAVOJ, and I'll talk about each one, and then you guys say something, and then we'll wrap it up after this. But I gathered some quotes together, and I really want to read them, so you'll see why in a second. Okay, so here's the thing. So besides the racism thing that we've talked about, the other big slam against SLAVOJ is his reactionaryism. So it goes like this. Something like SLAVOJ is reactionary because of what I'll call his accelerationist tendency concerning Trump and Le Pen. I myself have been skeptical about this strategy, but I see his point. I neither want to vote for centrist liberals nor for far-right conservatives. SLAVOJ's basic idea, though, is the longer we kick the liberal centrist can down the road, the stronger the fascist energies will grow and grow and grow. The accelerationist desire is to force something to happen now instead of later. I've seen SLAVOJ express a certain dislike for accelerationism in YouTube video, but I still think that type of logic is operative in his position on Trump. So, I mean, look, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I mean, I have friends who are accelerationists, and this idea that you need to make things worse right now in order to open up some sort of possibility. I see the logic there. I don't want to buy into the logic, but I also don't want to let the centrist think. So it's like just being caught in a deadlock. And so I think SLAVOJ was thinking about this idea of, yeah, if Trump gets in, it'll force the left to recalibrate or reorganize Sanders style or something like that. And yeah, so I want to know what you guys think on that charge.
It wasn't his point that he thought Democrats were kind of sleeping at the wheel and he was hoping that they would wake up. Right? And I think he walked it back later because he got a lot of flack. I don't know if he walked it back or not. I'm somehow under that impression. I don't know if I saw that or not, but I think he added I think he elaborated on his point at least. It's just, to me, this is a good example of, I don't see how this really has to do with his philosophy or his theory, right? But you're saying, we've got friends who are actual accelerationists. What about them? My thing to actual accelerationists is, I don't really think our political opinions make that much of a difference. In fact, I think that we should loudly proclaim that they don't and that we are not represented. And as soon as a person starts being like, but I'm an accelerationist, I think, oh, that just sounds like some copology, right? You're trying to cope with the fact that things are getting worse by telling yourself, it's good actually, because now we can just get over, to the better thing later. That's all I hear.
When are we talking about the move he made by saying we should, like it would be good if Trump got elected so that it would accelerate the possibilities of a sort of a deeper leftist transformation of politics?
Yep.
That I know that became controversial. I mean, I think again, like the logic in his head there is kind of a play of dialectical negativity, because the idea would be, if we got like a Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, it's just gonna be like it's gonna be a prolongation or continuation of the status quo, and there's not gonna be enough negativity to necessitate a deep leftist change in America. And then I've heard other people say that, to apply this leftist ideology into America is the wrong way to go, because America's never going to be pushed that far in that direction. America's never going to be pushed that far left as a mass movement, but maybe it would take, something like, something like a Trump administration of 2 terms pushing it over the edge or something like that. I'm not sure.
I'd like to just add to that I think you could confuse SLAVOJ's statements about Trump and the impact that has in terms of like clearing the field with a kind of accelerationism. But if you take into account his theories of retroactivity, then no act or event can ever be qualified as such until after it's happened. And that's the kind of sacrifice that we would have to make if we were going to think in revolutionary terms, is that the actual inscription of the meaning of what happens can only be ultimately judged, from the view from the apocalypse, so to speak, after the fact. And that's the thing. That's what we don't want to happen. That's what the accelerationists don't want to sacrifice, is the idea that what I'm doing right now is revolutionary, but also I get to judge it as such right now in the moment. And that's a meta-linguistic stance.
It does seem like that. And even, now, like, we got Biden, it's like the radical, I guess it's not even radical, but the fact it's like people were so like amped up about like Bernie, and you got the Bernie bros and the AOC simps and all that. But now that Biden's in office, it's like, where are they at? And the fact it's like, it seems like there's this sort of moderate, even like liberal stance between Bernie and even AOC now that they sort of didn't have when Trump was in office, and they kind of represented this sort of like socialist potentiality in America during Trump's time, and that's gone. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that.
Want to deal with this one, Michael, or you want me to move on? Okay. So then the other charge, which is the worst one, I think, in the, I mean, the racism one's the worst one, but this is the most laughable. Repetition and academic malpractice. So the charge is SLAVOJ really sucks because he basically keeps writing the same book over and over again. He admits this himself. This is, I think the counterpunch argument also does the same thing here.
A bit, yeah.
Attacks him for this. SLAVOJ keeps returning to the same topics and the same core group of thinkers. He self-plagiarizes and he recycles his material a lot. I mean, a lot. What distinguishes him is the fact that he is the only prominent academic I am aware of who engages in intra-textual self-plagiarism, who, in other words, recycles passages in one and the same book. To all of this, I say, and like, okay, maybe this is me as a working class peasant, but I don't give a shit if somebody repeats themselves, or like if somebody wants to write like a quick analysis of Death Drive in one book and they want to use that same logic and they just copy paste, I don't care at all. I don't know how that is some horrible charge. I don't care if he repeats himself or quotes his own shit or just recycles it if he's using it to make another point in another context. I don't think it's a big deal at all. And this idea that that's all he does, I just want to say that he does repeat himself a lot. There's no, all of us will agree to that. However, the key is to see how he doesn't simply repeat himself. For example, chapter 3 of Sublime Object of Ideology contains his application of Lacan's graph of desire to the process of ideological interpolation, which he never repeats anywhere else. The chapter on superego in the Metastases of Enjoyment is very singular and special. Yes, he'll discuss superego in virtually all of his books and even reconceptualize it, for example, at the beginning of chapter 6 of The Ticklish Subject. But his treatment of it in Metastases still stands out on its own. His analyses and usages of Lacan's 4 discourses in I Rock the Broken Kettle is unlike any of his discussions of the 4 discourses anywhere else. He has a wonderful engagement with Levinas in Did Somebody Say Totalitarianism, which never gets repeated anywhere else. He really, we really only get a robust description of SLAVOJ's Bartleby politics in the last chapter of The Parallax View, and so on and so on. There are these very special spots in his work that he works something out and he doesn't simply repeat it, copy and paste it. And this critic leaves that out. So, and then, okay, okay. So if anybody wants to address that, and then I'll move to the last point.
The people who hate this just don't read or write a lot, I think. I don't know. That's what it seems like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with
I think Žižek has had a meta theoretical aim that constitutes his entire career, which is this relationship between Hegel and Lacan, and he sort of repeats this because he's stumbled upon some unique theoretical formulation, which I think he thinks represents a new philosophical paradigm. And yeah. I think he wants to leave this behind, I think when the Žižekian moment is over, I think that he wants to leave this core body of work behind for hysterics like us to precisely work at this repetition and try to understand it, because this relationship specifically between German idealism and psychoanalysis has never been sort of explored or exposed in the way that Žižek has done it. And so I don't see the problem. It's like saying it would be like me saying, for example, all Richard Dawkins ever does is write the same book about evolutionary biology again and again and again. It's like, yeah,
Or
he's an
all
evolutionary biologist.
Heidegger does is write about being over and over and over again. That's all
Right.
Heidegger does.
And I think it has to do with the logic of the example. Žižek is the philosopher of the example and exemplification. And the example always brings with it a certain excess. And this revisiting of examples again and again, well, one, it could be the logic of the death drive itself, but two, it's the idea that we have to revisit examples so as to not get caught up in the illusion of, well, one, on the one hand, like a kind of, you could have like a sort of Anglo-Saxon nominalism, which only focuses on particulars, and then on the other hand, a idealism which centers itself around universals. But the reason Žižek uses his examples is not just to perform this like fireworks display to get people's attention, but to show how examples not only condense universals but problematize universals in a way that keeps us on our feet, that doesn't allow us to become too complacent when it comes to this idea of what and this is one of the charges against philosophy in general, is that it's too abstract, right? It zooms out too quickly. And I think that what Žižek's project is oriented towards is trying to counter that by finding examples from domains of life which would be considered traditionally beneath the purview of philosophy. The example always problematizes, and for that reason, we should adhere to the example rather than the beauty of the Platonic universal, which is apart from things, resplendent and self-satisfied.
Right. And that's what Hegel was trying to do originally in the phenomenology of like, how could philosophy be a science, right? Because he noticed something unique with science in that, but there's still the contradiction between the universal and the particular. And Žižek is adhering to the Hegelian dialectic and doing so with this notion of the example, problematizing the universal and the particular.
All right, everybody. It's been really good having you all on. I want everyone to have this opportunity to say their final piece, and then we're going to close it out. Cadell, seriously, thank you for joining us at 3 a.m. from France.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. I'll play some Eminem after that. It's a pleasure. I had some coffee. I'm doing all right, and I'll sleep in tomorrow morning. So no, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is here.
Sorry, mate. I'd just like to say anybody that's interested in Žižek's use of examples can refer to Robert Fowler's essay that he wrote on Žižek's, I think it's toolbox or toolkit, and Dave can put that in the video note.
Just send me the link. I'll put it there. Yep.
I want to say I did a video on the current affairs article when it first came out. Is that the current affairs article we were referring to?
Yeah.
If you can link that, I think that I did. I went as soon as that came out. I was like, oh no, I'm going to do a video about this. It was so bad. It was so hilarious. When I think was that Noam. I heard that Noam Chomsky was responsible for hiring that guy or for putting a hit out on him.
Oh really? I didn't hear that.
Okay.
No, I mean I'll just say as far as that article goes, the last criticism is charlatanism. And the author claims like, oh, well, he's a charlatan because in books like Absolute Recoil, he says stuff like Dialectical materialism transposes back into nature, not subjectivity as such, but the very gap that separates subjectivity from objective reality. For dialectical materialism, the subject is prior to the process of subjectivization. This process fills in the void, the empty form, that is the pure subject. Dialectical materialism considers historical materialism as a specific ontology, a kind of, the point is, he's going, oh, see, it's just a blah, 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 blah. And I want to go, well, bud, newsflash. If you think like, here's Kierkegaard, a human being is spirit. Well, what is spirit? Spirit is the self. What is the self? The self is a relation that relates itself to itself, or is the relations relating itself to itself in the relation? Sartre says, consciousness is, where does he say? Appearance of particular, we shall see that being for itself is being what it is not and not what it is, right? And Heidegger will say stuff like nothingness itself, however, is being. This goes back to the pre-Socratics. And if you think that philosophers making paradoxical statements is only something, only SLAVOJ does that. No, you haven't read Derrida, Deleuze. I mean, welcome to the party, pal. Like that's what this is. And so
I just want to.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm done.
I just want to say quickly. Last thing I want to say is that I think a lot of this, problem is that philosophers are operating on a different plane of discourse than a current affairs article, or even like the university discourse of like the production of the peer review process and stuff, like the papers like this. And I think in that way, it's like the criticism just won't have any real material effect in the big scheme of the historical narrative or the philosophical narrative as such. I mean, Žižek is a part of the philosophical narrative as such. He's going to be there 100 years from now. It doesn't matter if current affairs or whoever comes out with an article against him. Žižek is in the philosophical main narrative. He'll be there with Derrida and Heidegger and Foucault and stuff. So it's just another level of discourse. It's like,
hey, you mentioned Eminem. My spot is forever reserved. If I ever leave Earth, that would be the death of me first, right? Well, SLAVOJ can say that. So, look, what I want to say is just SLAVOJ's work has changed my life. I think he's one of the greatest philosophers that ever lived. I think he like Cadell saying, his legacy is going to endure. His theory of ideology is going to stick around. And I think his most lasting contribution is going to be his reading of Hegel and of dialectical, like Lacanian Hegelian ontology. And I think he's planted the seeds and laid the foundation for this type of ontology to emerge. I think other people are going to come along and develop it further in more concrete detail or whatever. He's seeing the big picture. And I think this ontology of contradiction is here to stay. And I think there's a very strong case to be made that Hegel or Žižek is the first person who ever remotely read Hegel correctly. And that's going to be another thing that endures. And on a personal note, it's like his work, I've just always connected to it. His work has gotten me through some of my hardest times, being able to read his books. When I was a bouncer, I could sit there and read the books on my phone. I talk about it in the article I posted today.
I'm sharing it in the chat.
And I got to meet SLAVOJ, as did you. Many of us have. He was one of the nicest guys I've ever met. And I know how he is to his friends and how much they love him and how great he's been to them. And so I don't like these cheap, opportunistic takedowns. I think they're bullshit. And I think most people can see through them and see them for what they are. And long live SLAVOJ.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
Will
Have
the
a
real
wonderful night.
Žižekians please stand up?
I want
That's all I
to
wanna say.
pose a question before we leave, apropos of jump pumping. The third party in the experience, in the dynamic, is that a vanishing mediator? Something to contemplate.
All right,
That's
we'll
going to
think
be our
about it.
next.
Here's the vanishing mediator. Bye, Felicia. All right. and I'm still here. Let's see if I can turn on my camera here. All right, what's up, everybody? Right before I let you all go, and I'm sure some of you have already gone, I want to take a quick moment to make a plug for our sponsors. That's right, everybody. It's the time for a commercial. A commercial? Who are the sponsors of this production? Well, the sponsors is me, Theory Underground. I put forward my own wage labor money to build this website, and so I want to talk about it really quick. Looks kind of like Facebook, doesn't it? Well, that's because you can have your own personal profile on this website. That's right. That's right. If you go, I'm going to give you all a quick tour of the website. This is the homepage. It's a work in progress. Give me a break. I made a little trailer for my European tour that we did. I'm going to be rolling out videos all year long about various philosophers whose graves we visited. The general areas or sort of research threads are political and social theory, the good life, heretics and hysterics, and special cultural topics. And you can see here that I have a calendar with all of the upcoming events. And then I have a list here of some of the essential texts that we aim to read and reread and reread. So that's a homepage. But the main thing I want you to think about is going to the course tab of theory-underground.com/courses. There are currently 3 courses available. One starts next Saturday. That's Carl Jasper's The Idea of the University. We're going to read that book in its entirety. It's a short book. It's a relatively easy work, but it's an important work of philosophy that thinks about what is the idea, role, function, and responsibilities of a university as opposed to the other institutions that exist today, political and business, and how do the interests of the political and business interests contradict the idea of the university and co-opt it. So it's a sort of positive critique by an underrated philosopher, one of the fathers of existentialism. So that's the idea of the university. It starts on Saturday. Then we have the professional managerial class consciousness course. By the way, both of these courses I would say are beginner level. Professional managerial class consciousness, we will be talking about primarily Barbara Ehrenreich's work, but also we will be talking about some liberal, conservative, etc. perspectives on class today. And then lastly, and that's on January 25th when it begins. These are $50 a piece. Oh my gosh, do not call me right now. This is a terrible time to call me. Okay, stop it. Hold on, folks.
I was expecting everybody to join. I was expecting just Nick.
Guys, do not call me right now. I'm still streaming. Bye-bye. Jeez. All right, sorry everybody. And then lastly, Mikey will be teaching SLAVOJ Žižeks for They Know Not What They Do. But for anybody who's been a fan of the stuff that I've done with Mikey, it's going to be the same deal. It's kind of a co-teaching thing where he gives the lecture and I'm the interviewer. I'm the hysteric. I try to listen thinking, okay, if I was if I was me before I got super into philosophy, as I was getting into it, how would this sound? What would I want me to ask in this situation? That's what I bring to the table is my ears, my pre-philosophy, pre-theory ears. I try to keep those sound by having conversations with people who are not into philosophy and theory and asking them what they think words mean or trying to talk about big ideas in ways that get outside of the usual jargon and ruts that people get bogged down in. That's why a lot of people like these conversations that I have with Mikey, but it's also why a lot of people gravitate towards the stuff being put out from this channel is because that's, I think, one of my superpowers. And so Mikey has perfected that superpower. And so it's really why we've developed this term, the Mikey Standard, right? Can you talk about a concept without constant references or appeals to other jargon or thinkers? Can you talk about it in plain speak and then use relatable examples? That's the question. And so that course begins on February 25th. We'll be reading SLAVOJ Žižek For They Know Not What They Do from cover to cover. This book is dense, pure theory, and it's not like most of his books that are filled with cinema examples. This is, if you really just want to get into the weeds, this is where to do it. He said that though Sublime Objective Ideology was the more, popular work, this is the more serious work. And so he said when people like Sublime Object, but not for they know not what they do, they should remain silent. And after having just read it with the Žižek and so on podcast people and Matthew Filspater, I can agree. This is when I first started getting interested in SLAVOJ, I really wish I had read this work much earlier into everything. So yeah, I hope that you will look at these courses. And then finally, when you register with the website, you will be able to participate in one of the forums is open to the public. And so if you have questions from this stream, if you have questions for any of the speakers who are on this stream, if you want to join the longer conversation, the one that exists outside of streams, then go to the theory-underground.com/forums, go to then public/open forums, FAQ and meme stash. And when you go there, you will be able to, once registered, participate. So when someone was asking earlier, do you have a Discord? The answer is, I did, and then I deleted it. Because I think that this is a way better way to bring people in who hate Discord, who hate Slack, who hate notifications on their phone, who hate having to constantly keep up with a wall of text, who hate putting a lot of thought into a message and then sending it, and then everybody else's follow-ups buries what you said unless you pin it, which is the tendency of Discord. So the thing about forums is that they might be a little bit more of like classic internet. They're a little bit more old school. Fair enough. But the thing is, that's from the good old days of the internet before the attention economy completely took over. All right. We're not trying to harvest your data. We want you to be able to actually participate in the conversation. And the thing that hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, because we've only been around for a month, is that every one of the courses is going to have its own forum. And then over time, as we repeat certain readings and courses, you'll be able to, you had some idea, you've been thinking about it ever since you were in that course, and now you've revisited the text, or you have some question and it's months to years later, and you're wishing that you could bring that question up in that class that you were in, but hey, now you're out of the university, it's too late. Not here, not at the Theory Underground. At Theory Underground, the forum stays, as long as we can keep it going. And so that's the last thing. It does cost money. And so if you have money and you want to support, then go to theory-underground.com/support. What will you find there? You will find books, courses, and ways to be a patron. So I hope that you will all do that. I'm going to close out here by playing a testimonial from our friend Bert.
And it's like you're digging a well. I couldn't believe it when I saw that poster. Boulder in Boise, fucking Idaho. Are you kidding me? It was virtually an answer to an unspoken prayer, It really was. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was interested in the things that I was interested in, that I had been interested in for years and had kind of given up on in futility. I'd labored in solitude for so long. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to bounce ideas off of. It just vastly accelerated my ability, I don't get too philosophical, to interrogate, to inquire, and to see connections between things.
And so the Theory Underground that Dave is developing in this mission is trying to reach an audience of people who aren't just doing philosophy in a university setting. Why is there an advantage to doing philosophy outside of an academic setting?
Well, the neat thing is that you can really drill down. When you're in school, you have to do 50 things, and you do them all partially. And it's like you're digging a well, and you're digging very shallow wells. When you can drill down deep and take your time, and really get into something, especially with a company of fellows that you get into the slipstream of a great philosopher, and you just have to take the deep dive. But initially, a lot of these philosophers, they're speaking to a tradition, they're trying to resolve specific problems, and they just assume you know what those are, that you've had their life experience. So the first time you read them, you're just trying to get the lay of the land, and you may well have some insights. You may wrongly associate certain things you know with what they're saying, but then you'll maybe like look at a secondary text, and now, since you have something to bring to the table, all the lights start going off. And then when you read the philosopher the second time, you can read them more knowledgeably, and so you're looking for things, you're better able to follow along, you're not left behind so much. The third reading, though, and these are for profound books. I mean, you don't have to read everything like this, but for a profound text, the third reading is where you've learned enough that you relate it to everything else you know, that you begin to see the connectedness between what this philosopher is doing and the implicit, unstated situation that they were speaking to initially. You know something about that, and you see the connection between that and all sorts of other things, and you connect it to your life and the way you live and move through the world and the way you see things and interact with people, and you are not just absorbing, you're creating, you're a co-creator. When it's all said and done, you just have to put it into your own words. And there's a danger of reductionism there, but when you put it into your own words and you're bringing all these different strands together, it's really phenomenal. And that's what the third reading does.
So, a few years ago, Dave, running the Theory Club channel, had a Patreon going and
Right.
discontinued accepting money from people. But since then, you have continued to make a donation monthly. And
Right.
It's obviously very meaningful to Dave, meaningful to me as well, being Dave's partner.
Right.
And so, why do you do that? Essentially.
Well, Dave brings people together. Whatever Dave is doing is valuable, and my life was completely changed, and I'm grateful. I can't afford to give Dave $50 a month, but I do because it brings me joy. Every time I get my Social Security, the first thing I do is send $50 to Dave, and my heart sings. And it's a sense of gratitude. I don't feel obligated to do it. I want to do it. And I want to do whatever I can to help Dave do for other people what he did for me. And I want that to continue. And it's truly, I take great joy in it. It's the best $50 I spend a month. Really is. If you can plant a seed where a handful of people meet each other and they can all have the experience that we've had face to face with each other, that would be awesome.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. And remember, when you sign up to the website, check your spam folder. If you didn't get the verification email in your spam folder, I guarantee the way to solve the problem is to ask the website to resend it, and then you'll get it. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are coming at this from. Take care. Bye-bye.